Good evening. I've got 6:01. Let's go ahead and get started with the last meeting of the year. Okay, so I'll call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting, Manatee Springs City Council for December 20th, 2022. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Mayor. City Council members Judith Chandler,
Present.
John Shada.
Here.
Julie Wolf,
Here.
Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Michelle Weatherholt,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune,
Present.
and Mayor John Graham.
Present. Thank you. Okay, council. Everybody's had a chance to look the agenda over, so I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda. Second.
A motion to second.
Mayor, I would like to pull F3 off the consent calendar for comments.
Okay, let's go ahead and approve the main agenda and then we'll
Thank you.
handle that when we get to the
I'm
consent
sorry.
calendar.
I thought we were doing that too.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is item D. Okay, so Judy, how do you want us to vote? Electronically or by voice? Okay, electronically? Okay.
Okay, so this didn't capture two of the votes. So let me go ahead and stop it and do it again. Okay, so we have 7-0 in favor. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the agenda is approved. We'll move on to item E. That's public comment on non-agenda items. So this would be the time when anyone can speak to a non-agenda item. It's kind of a thin crowd tonight. Is there anybody that wants to talk to a non-agenda item? And Judy, did we have any emails or any contact?
No, Mayor.
Okay. All right, I guess not. So let's go ahead and move on. Next item is F, consent calendar. We have 4 items. First is approval of the December 6th, 2022 regular meeting minutes. The second is warrants for November 2022. Third, approval of Creek Walk Trail construction contract. And fourth, approval of Stephen Graybill as a regular member of the City Planning Commission. Councillor Chandler, I think you had something you wanted to pull.
I'd like to pull item F3, approval of Creek Walk Trail construction contract for discussion only.
Okay, are there any other council members who'd like to remove an item? Okay, John, Councilman Shada has asked also to discuss item F3, which was the same as Councilor Chandler. So, okay, the consent calendar now is items 1, 2, and 4. Assuming we approve the consent calendar, that we'll then discuss F3 next. So we have we've removed 3. I would entertain a motion to accept and approve the consent calendar, the 3 items.
So I move to accept the consent calendars F1, 2, and 4 as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Okay, let's vote.
Seven to 0 in favor.
Okay, items 1, 2, and 4 of the consent calendar approved. The next item we'll discuss then is item F3, approval of the Creek Walk Trail construction contract. Councilor Chandler, you had shown some interest in discussing that, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to go on record as saying I'm real confident that it will pass. I probably am an N of 1 here. But I feel like I want to go on record when my tenure is done up here. I want to make sure that my voting record reflects my core values and integrity. And I am for the Creek Walk in general. my concern here is, in an evening when we're looking at the land use development code and thinking about, gosh, are we going to give, commercial developers an opportunity to develop 90% of a lot if they throw in 15% permeable surface? But yet we've got this beautiful section of trail that I walk more often than I don't in a week. And we're going to put, 6 figures of concrete down. And I feel like we're on wash, rinse and repeat. The contract also calls to take out 15 units of trees. So at the tune of $12,000. So I feel like here we go again. I feel like sometimes we're a city that, it says what we want. We want to promote canopy and climate change. And yet sometimes we don't really quite get there with regards to what we're actually doing. So I'm disappointed that this particular section of Creek Walk and perhaps other sections, we didn't sit down and consider that this would be a great opportunity to do what many other cities are doing and putting down pervious surfaces, especially on this section that's below El Paso. So that just really saddens me. And it also saddens me that once again, like other sections of the city, we are now taking, another 15 trees out. And that makes it hard for me to sleep at night and to vote yes for this. And so I would like to see the city start to really embrace the fact that we have a climate change crisis, and to look at these opportunities and say, how can we best preserve this little section of trail and is 10 feet of concrete and taking out 15 trees, is it the answer? And I know what the comeback is, right? I already know what the arguments are. Well, it's going to increase micromobility and decrease car traffic. Well, let me tell you, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it'll increase micromobility, but the fact that it may or may not decrease automobile traffic is something I'd have to see with my own eyes. And so, I'm impressed with what Denver's doing. They're actually taking streets. If you've read recently in the Denver paper that they're going to take some streets and they're going to actually make them, fewer lanes of traffic and take, pavement that's already down and increase electric vehicle bike traffic. And so I think that's something that I want to plant that seed. So those are my biggest concerns about this is to me, it's just, we're checking the box, but we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I think it's time for us to grow as a city and think a little bit more outside the box. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Judith. Mr. Shada.
Several things. I'm kind of concerned about this new synthetic pedestrian bridge that essentially is going to just be plopped down directly in front of one of the most beautiful kind of stone bridge vistas we have of the Mayfair Stone Bridge. That really concerns me. It seems like there was some overriding concern in which to make the bridge cross at that point, which I object to. I'm concerned about, I'm not clear about all the color of all this riprap and all of this embankment construction that's going to go on. I kind of really I fear that it's probably just going to look like something that to be kind of blunt, like Colorado Springs would do, okay, which would be some kind of cheap looking gray concrete, the cheapest possible material. I don't see anything in here that talks about kind of the coloration of this material. Seems like an awful lot of improvement of embankments and things like that with more rock. And my other concern is, I believe on the end of this thing here, I kind of looked it up and we don't even have an ADA compliant picnic table picked out. Okay, so I will be voting against this. I think this needs to be sent back to staff for additional analysis. I don't think I agree with Councilor Chandler. I don't think we were given options here. I think a big slab of concrete, okay, going down in this area, I think is not the direction we ought to be headed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shada. Other council members? Nancy?
Yeah, this has been a passion project of a whole lot of people for probably 20 years now to get this creek walk completed. Phase 1 was completed probably 15 years ago now. The creek walk master plan was completed about 4 or 5 years ago now. After extensive public process and a strategic working group made up in part of citizens. So I know that there are a number of trade-offs in this, but I would very much like to see it go forward. I think on balance, the trade-offs are with encouraging people to walk and ride, and I think, or roll, excuse me, are worth it. Although I'm not crazy about, excuse me, a lot of concrete, but that is the standard for how you do this sort of an urban trail. And the community interest in this was to have a alternative transportation corridor alternative to Manitou Avenue. And some parts have been completed. I know that there was some angst over the 10-foot sidewalk in the MAPS project, but that was also part of the Creek Walk Trail. That is part of the Creek Walk Trail as well. So until we see it completed, I think it's hard to see the total potential if you've not been working on it as extensively. And I do want to acknowledge my colleagues' concerns because they were shared all through this process. So again, I am strongly in favor of it because I don't want to see this get kicked down the road any more than it already has been. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
I have a question for, maybe Nancy would know. But why? Why aren't we using something other than concrete? Why is that so compelling?
The concrete allows it to be maintained much more easily. And you know, if you see people down there now on bikes or in strollers after it's rained or in the snow, you can't. I mean, when it snowed or it gets icy and so on, and you can't really use it effectively. So the concrete will allow it to be maintained through all weather events. And Dole is here. He might want to address some of these things as well.
Yeah, Dole, would you like to respond to the question, please?
Dole Gerbenik, city engineer. I could respond to as many of the questions as I can. I'll work backwards. Porous pavement has a place until it gets silted in. So once it gets silted in or filled in by debris, it becomes impervious, and then you have to go and maintain it, which often requires you to have to use like a vacuum, like the big industrial grade vacuum to pull all the porous or all the fines back out of the porous pavement. It's much more difficult to build. It's not generally a poured. So concrete's poured, it comes in a truck and you pour it out. It's generally loose pavers that are stacked or built by hand. Those require more maintenance and they are quite a bit more expensive. The other thing is that this section is continuing the section that was already built to the east, kind of to the north of Shriver behind the pool. And then this also is filling in gaps, as Nancy mentioned, from MAPS, and it also connects into Midland Trail. So, you know, from a big picture perspective, this is a piece within a much bigger trail section that's connecting the far end of Manitou all the way to the limits of the Midland Trail with a 10-foot wide multi-use trail, with a concrete multi-use trail. So I don't know if that answered your question.
And can you also address why we have to remove so many trees?
So yes, and I don't know if you saw the caliper of the trees I don't think any of these trees are over 2 or 3 inches. We went through great detail to identify each individual tree, but there was nothing of significant size that's at risk of being removed. These are all on the fringe. They are all generally 2-inch or less caliper trees that are coming out for the project. Because the trail's functioning as it is now, there isn't a lot of widening that has to happen. So there isn't a lot of impact outside of the existing footprint of the trail. So, and I'd be happy to walk it with someone if they were interested, but the trees that are coming out are very small in nature and are not what, you know, what we have discussed in the past of our heritage trees and the trees that we really try to work to protect.
Judith?
I do appreciate that. Thank you. As someone who walks that trail probably 5 days a week, at least minimum, I'm aware that already, there's the split rail fence that's popped up and that already there's been so much fire mitigation and clearing of that area anyway, because of what? Climate change is what I'm being told, right? So a lot of that's been cleared out anyway. And if these trees are so small, why is it costing us $12,000 to take them out? I'm having it, I don't know. But anyway, back to I'll let that go for the moment. Back to the surface. I mean, I've been visiting communities that have been putting down the materials that we're discussing. I went to Breckenridge and looked at an entire parking lot that is made of pervious surface. And I'm just having trouble wrapping my mind around, did we really do our due diligence in looking at all the potential possibilities for materials that can be used when clearly concrete is a pretty environmentally awful product when you look at it. So I'm just wondering if that was done. I appreciate Councillor Fortune because this has been a discussion that's been going on longer than I've been sitting in this chair. I realize that, but I happen to be sitting in this chair now. I wasn't here, for the original discussions, unfortunately, but here we are now. And so I just, I'm sad. I have some sadness about that section of the trail. Just being another concrete thing all the way up to that beautiful bridge. And I think that it's already difficult to walk that trail with my dogs. I already feel like I'm being run over by micromobility. I love in my perfect world to see us looking at our streets like Manitou Avenue and El Paso Boulevard as better ways to have micromobility and decrease cars. But I'll stop now because that's just my stump speech. But thank you for that. I'd like to walk it with you though. I will definitely take you up on that.
I could also mention or address Mr. Sheda's questions. So the original project did include that bridge work. We advertised the project once, bids came in, as we have all been finding out, significantly higher than what was budgeted several years ago. And, this project is 82% funded with federal dollars, so it isn't easy to necessarily go and adjust that. So we made the decision to go ahead and reduce the scope a little bit and to stop that area and not put in that synthetic bridge that was mentioned. So the way this would function is that existing wooden bridge that was behind the chamber will remain in the meantime, and then the trail will continue to go to Mayfair at the same time. So basically, we'll need to do another phase of the project to do the bridge. So there's that. And then also the bouldering, the landscaping that is creating kind of the creek access in this area is with specifically chosen and sized and colored boulders. It won't look necessarily like Soda Springs. Soda Springs was like slabs that were built like a staircase. This is, thank you, that is loud. This is more of boulders and textures and colors that have been identified because, we're not going to go through this project again. So we have every incentive to make it as beautiful and aesthetically pleasing as possible. Concrete has a place, but not a big giant gray slab and what the boulders could complement and add to it. So I'd be happy to, go over that with more detail as well.
So I have a question. So what we're looking at here does not include this bridge?
No, the reduced scope. So the way we did that, instead of having the plans redone, we clarified in the bidding documents on the rebid that it was only to include and then everything but the removal of the old bridge and the installation of the new bridge. And we did that through the bid tab. So they didn't even supply a price for that.
So can we get an ADA compliant picnic table instead of, this is the cheapest picnic table you can pick out.
Yes, I don't see an issue with that. I didn't realize it was the cheapest one that can be picked out.
Well, I mean, it's $400. I mean, it's really easy. You just cut and paste and Google it. It's not even ADA compliant.
Okay.
So
we can easily make that
I think
change.
we ought to make every effort at every stage that we do things to make things ADA compliant. We're so non-compliant that even if it costs us another, and you know what? All the new picnic tables that we have all through
Yes.
town, okay, are all ADA compliant. So this contractor did not even walk around and look in our community in terms of to see what our values are.
Well, so this project, as you remember, was around for a long time. And a lot of design happened several years ago. I think it would be very easy for me to ask him to swap out what's in the plans with an ADA compliant. It may not have been brought up to the design team. The design team hasn't been under contract for a year and a half. I've been carrying this project for the last year and a half, and I think it'd be very easy to swap out the identified picnic table with an ADA compliant.
Okay, so I guess what I'd like to understand is, so obviously we have some design documents here to show the location of this bridge, okay? And then in the nuances of the bid, you're telling me that this bridge is not going in, which actually I'm delighted in because I do not like the location of that bridge. I think that is probably one of the most picturesque locations in terms of with just the natural riparian foliage and whatnot. There are calendars, okay, with that. And to me, it would just really break my heart to see us just plop down some synthetic bridge at that location, when in reality, there are other locations in which that could cross, okay, that would not impact that view corridor. And so I'm sympathetic that we're trying to work on this, but this is our first opportunity to kind of comment on this. And so I'm sensitive to Nancy's concerns, but I don't see anything. We already have a creek trail in this area. Okay, it's already functioning. It already has a high degree of volume. And that's why I'm bringing it up in terms of, I don't feel like that we're up against some barrier that, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all sorts of money or funding or momentum on something like that. So I'm actually delighted that bridge is not going in there. I would really hope that if the picnic table is going in this thing, that we would pick something that looks like the rest of our infrastructure, okay, that is to our standards of meeting essentially ADA. It seems like all the other slopes and everything else are all sensitive to that, correct?
Correct.
In terms of, so I don't see why we would get down to a picnic spot and not have it ADA compliant in terms of for somebody to be able to utilize something. So that's, I'm happy to hear that we can make that change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Judith?
Just back to the tree question, since we are going to be hearing the land use development code on first reading tonight, it does have a section about replacement. Will the replacement of those 12 small caliber trees be under the new LUDC guidelines for tree replacement?
I don't have the plans in front of me. I'd have to look at the landscaping details about what is being replaced. I would have to look at it to get back to you. I mean, the landscaping went through its own review, and I hope it was reviewed by the committee at the time, but I'd have to look at it, Ms. Chandler, to really verify.
Thank you.
Joel, question about the bridge that apparently is not going to be built now. It looks from the drawing that it's going over that little weir that's there. Am I misinterpreting the drawings here, or there's a little dam across the creek there, just upstream from the pedestrian bridge?
Yeah, it'll just fly right over the top of it at a 45-degree angle, basically to the creek. And the reason for that was so that we could get people to the backside of the chamber and then along Mayfair. That's how that's designed, but that certainly, I mean, could be up for some adjustments. I mean, it sounds like there is some opposition to the bridge. And, you know, we really want to do what the corridor needs.
Right, and I'm thinking back, if I remember correctly, when that little weir was poured, my recollection is there's a sewer main that goes under that. And also it was designed so that it could impound the water upstream there and create a habitat area for
Yeah.
trout. And of course, that's all been silted up and it would take some redoing to turn it back into a trout habitat. But I still think sometimes that would be a relatively cheap and desirable thing that, I mean, it's when you see Manitou folks going out with a fishing pole and sometimes a kid, it's a pretty neat thing to have in the community. So
Generally, when
quick
those
observation.
pedestrian bridge goes in, the foundations, you know, we need to be out of the floodplain so that we have a zero floodplain impact on that. So those foundations are usually moved far enough out so that there doesn't impact anything within the floodway.
Okay. Cool. That muddied the waters a little bit. Nancy? Julie? And then Nancy.
Nancy's taught me the importance of getting data, so I'm asking you, how much extra would it cost to use the environmentally friendly stuff instead of the concrete?
I don't have a firm number on that.
Can you get it?
Yes,
I mean,
Um,
I don't have authority to ask you to get it. It has to be a group decision apparently, but that would be important to me to know.
there is a caveat to this that I just don't know the answer to. Is because this is federally funded and it's a multimodal trail, if there are any surface type restrictions on that. I just don't know the answer to it. It could be nothing, or they could come back and say, no, it needs to be of these surfaces. And so we'd have to look into that. Now, I will say, we had a very difficult time getting bidders on this. And prices were pretty high. It's just a difficult time to be bidding work. So that I can certainly try to get a price and see what that does. And we can go from there if that's what the council so chooses.
Nancy?
I move to approve the Creek Walk Trail construction contract with the addition of the change to the ADA picnic table.
I second, but I'd like to emphasize the ADA piece, not just the picnic table, but just as an overall arching desire for the trail.
And so we have a motion and a second discussion.
I missed that. I'm sorry, Natalie. Was that?
I
a
just
friendly
wanted to
amendment or-
emphasize, yeah, and again, I don't know where that falls. I just said it out loud. So maybe I just need
You
to
want
take
to
a
look at the
second.
overall?
That include ADA in all aspects of the trail design, not just the picnic table.
Oh,
Any further discussion, council? Okay, so we have a motion to approve the contract with the idea of putting in an ADA picnic table instead. Okay, let's go ahead and vote then.
Okay, we have a 3-4 vote. We have Counselor Wolf, Shada, Chandler, and Weatherholt voting against.
Okay, so the motion fails.
Motion fails.
Would anyone like to have an additional motion for, I mean, to any, do we want to postpone it and ask for more information? Okay, Mr. Shada.
I move that we postpone this item and that we direct staff to do the following, that we get options about a more environmentally friendly surface. That in particular, this trajectory of this bridge this close to our historic bridge, that we get some other options in terms of the placement of this thing. I think this is a very difficult location for the city to get in and maintain those utilities in that weir that the mayor spoke about. I think that the crossing could be at some place in which is quite different. I think another option is, to be perfectly honest, is I think we ought to maybe even consider whether the Mayfair Bridge could be used as a pedestrian access and we actually save some money. by not having another bridge there. And maybe we talk about how Mayfair is used in terms of just as traffic, kind of what Counselor Chandler talked about. I think that we've already heard that it seems like the picnic table can be made ADA, and I concur with Counselor Johnson that we review this entire project to make sure that it is completely ADA compliant, from top to bottom, so that we haven't missed anything. I do like, so that would be my motion that we postpone this for 60 days or something like that. Is that enough time for Mr. Grebnick to get some bids in? I mean, get some information in.
Well, we've got a motion here. I know Dole did want to raise.
Dole,
his
I'm
hand
sorry.
first, but-
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Joel.
the entire project is ADA compliant. We're doing quite a bit of work over at Shriver Park to do the appropriate switchback to meet the proper
Okay.
vertical grades to get
Okay.
up to that. So the entire project, except for, from what I know, except for the picnic table, is absolutely ADA compliant.
Okay,
I
so,
mean, someone stamped it that it is.
so I guess my comment on this is if we're not doing the bridge, okay, I realize I have a motion on the table, but I do have a question. We're not doing the bridge. And the diagrams that are drawn this way would show that we would pour a slab of concrete and we would end short of Mayfair. Okay, at that point, is that kind of what we want to do? And so I guess I want some more options on the table in terms of for this, where this bridge crossing would be, because it appears like that's something that we want to do at some later date. And I guess I don't want to, I guess I want us to make sure that if at a later time that that's not the location where we want the bridge, that a lot of the rest of this design gets kind of thrown out or we incur a whole bunch of extra costs. So that would be my motion. Do I have a second?
No, hang on, John. You've rambled a bit here, so I would ask you to restate your
Okay,
motion
I would
concisely.
restate my motion that we postpone this for 60 days in order for staff to bring us some options back with regard to the surface, okay? Tree removal, okay? Bridge location, okay? And it sounds like to me, we have assurances that we have the right color of materials and that the picnic table could be a no-brainer to fix. So that would be my motion.
Let's see if there's a second.
I'll second.
Second by Counselor Chandler. So we'll have some discussion. Dole, why don't
Can
you weigh in?
I would recommend that we treat, so the way we did in the re-advertisement is we stopped the project at station 2.00, which is the station right before where the bridge connection would tie into the trail, so that no matter what happened in the future, the work we're doing is relevant and doesn't prohibit any other future work. I would recommend that maybe you treat the bridge and the trail at this point separate, because there are some challenges with the bridge. However, the trail can operate and be improved with whatever services decided on without the bridge, because it's operating that way today. If you connect those two, then the bridge work could take a while and a lot of money and then continue to hold up the rest of the trail section.
I guess I'll amend my motion to make your suggestion, but I want to propose that we actually stop the construction that you at actually 3+00, because I think if the bridge got moved, it would, I don't know as I want all that creek access maybe in that particular location. And I know this is a discussion and I'm making the mayor crazy about discussion on it, but given that you brought it up, I thought I had to comment on it. I'm sorry.
In the spirit of Christmas, John, I'll try to be patient.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
So now, okay, what I heard you say.
I
what
know,
heard you
no,
say,
no,
John,
I
is
will
you wanted to-
re-clarify my motion that we
Okay.
just basically, I think staff has heard enough information. I'm hoping that you guys can collect this information, that we can postpone this for 60 days and have some options with regard to the surface, the trees, and the final trajectory of that area behind the chamber. Does that simplify that for you, Mr. Mayor?
It does. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It's kind of you.
I'll maintain my second on the motion.
Okay, so we were 60 days. Okay, we're gonna rethink the surface, the trees, and the, I guess that final design as it approaches Mayfair.
Exactly right.
Okay, so we have,
That staff would bring us back costs and options.
okay,
So
okay, Dole, please.
So we don't currently have a design team on this project, nor do we have design funds. So the plans in front of us are what is available. If we choose to adjust, redo the bridge, we will need to go and get, because they have to look at the grades, they have to look at the span, they have to look at the cost with the new adjusted bridge. So I don't know if I can get you quality information for the bridge.
Okay, but I thought you said we weren't going to do the bridge.
Well,
in the
that-
scope of this anyway, right?
That's correct. This contract would be from station 2.00 to all the way to Shriver. If it was amended to 3.00, that's adjustable as well. And then that's the rest of the trail all the way to Shriver, and it's excluding anything from 3.0 all the way to Mayfair.
Yes. That's the sense of, I think, staff direction. So I think we can postpone this for 60 days and then we can get, I think the primary thing here is to get from what you're talking about, since we're not doing the bridge, okay? I'm proposing that we actually kind of delete this little creek access thing here because maybe we want to move the bridge to a different location, okay? So we go back to 3.3+00, as you said, correct? Okay.
Sure.
Move that back a notch, all right?
That's 100
So
feet.
that might reduce some of the scope of stuff that goes in there, okay, might reduce the cost of the bid and deal with the surface and the trees. So it seems like to me, it's the surface and the trees, okay, and sucking the scope back a little bit from the chamber, okay? And it seems like to me that would just be a bid change as well as getting information on the surface treatment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do we need extra design expertise in order to figure out what that might be?
For the surface,
Mhm.
no, I think I can handle that. I
Okay.
think we can quantify the trees that'll be impacted. And to your point, those trees may have, some of them may have already been mitigated through that area as well. I'm not really sure.
So I think if you have these options earlier in sensitivity to Nancy's comments that if you have answers to these things, I think that you can work with the administrator and with the mayor and bring it forward to us earlier if you get these answers earlier. Thank you.
Judith, you had seconded the original motion. Are you still willing to second? now that John's
Yes, I
restated
will
those?
maintain my second on
Sorry.
the original motion.
Okay, Julie,
I wanted to see, I don't think this changes the motion, but I also wanted to see if staff could inform us with respect to any trees that you recommend still must be removed, what the cost would be if we comply with the proposed land use code, which I believe, if I recall correctly, requires us to either replace each one or replace 2 to 1. I can't recall how that final version was presented to us, but I'd like to know that what the cost would be, because I think it's only appropriate that we follow our own code, even though it's not enacted yet. You know, that just seems like the moral thing to do. So if we could find out what that extra cost would be to comply with what the code is, the new code is suggesting with respect to tree removal, I'd appreciate that piece of data as well. Thanks.
Counselor Chandler?
And I just want to say with regards to that, 18.03.6.5 vegetation preservation standards in the new code, which is on page 42 of 233, has a very clear table. And I really appreciate that. It's very, it's per caliper. So if that's what we're going with, it clearly defined, so we'll know exactly how many trees. And also, I think there's a provision in there for if we can't plant the number of trees required for replacement, that there's a couple other options in the code to put them in other places in the city. So we can have that discussion when you come back. Thank you.
Counselor Johnson?
I've also been, I think, working on the Creek Walk for over a decade, but I think that we had a Creek Walk committee that was kind of actively meeting, and it disbanded, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe. I'm wondering if it's worth considering getting that committee active again so that, again, as we talk about some of these amenities along the way, like the picnic tables and whatnot, I know Parab is talking about having some like adult exercise equipment along the creek walk. They mentioned something about that. Like, it'd be nice to kind of get a unified voice around the trail from a number of different organizations that really have a vested interest in this, really coming together. I don't know.
Thank you. Other comments?
Mayor, can I just make sure I understand the motion so that we follow? So now what I'm hearing is really two things. You want us to focus on the tree removal and vegetation and the surface and and bring back proposals of what a different surface would cost in the maintenance, et cetera, for that. Is that correct?
Well, and I think in addition, what would happen with the bid if we shave the project back, as Dole suggested, to 0.3+00, which I think would reduce essentially what's going on there behind the creek. Because that looks like to me, that's quite a bit of, what's the surface treatment with that little zigzag that goes down to Fountain Creek there?
I think that's a soft surface.
Okay, that's a soft surface. And so it looks like to me there's some riprap in there and some stuff like that. And maybe we can delineate by deleting that out for now, okay, as to what that would do to the bid. I guess my other comment is I think I realize that prices are really high now, okay, but I think we're also entering a season here as the economy starts to kind of wind down a little bit, in which there may be actually some people who are a little more hungry for work here. And so maybe we're at kind of the top end of it. Maybe this is a good time to reconsider this, because it seems like as the economy kind of rests a little bit here, you know, we might have some hungry contractors. So I'm not so worried about that per se, other than getting this project right. Should we vote?
No, Dole's got a comment.
So I have two questions. How would you like the information presented for the pervious service? I can't really necessarily get a qualified bid. I can only get approximate, like tell me about how much this is per square foot or per square yard type thing. You know, I can try to present pros and cons. There are pros and cons of every surface. And then the other thing I would need to check on is, you know, we had the project cleared through CDOT. So if we are potentially wanting to cancel the existing bid and the contract that we are potentially wanting to sign, the company's called Greatland Concrete. I don't know any kind of complications with that, because we would basically be saying, sorry, contractor, we're changing our mind. We would like to do something different. And I just don't know. That might be perfectly fine, no big deal. Or they're, you know, CDOT may not appreciate that.
Can you educate me in terms of why CDOT's involved in this?
It's the federal grant. The 82% is a federal grant, and CDOT is the
Oh, for the
administrator
transportation.
of the
component
federal
of it.
dollars.
Thank you. Duh. I'm very sorry. Thank you.
Any other comments from council?
Well, did we answer Dole's question enough? I mean, that, because I would like estimates on the vacuuming, like what it's going to cost to vacuum out the concrete, the porous. I mean, I think we could get the estimate of what it costs to lay it down, but I don't think that's the actual cost.
Or if that might just be a matter of, 10 hours of staff time times whatever.
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
would cost whatever their hourly wage is or something. Is that what you mean?
I just want to know what the cost is going to be.
Or like to buy a
actually-
shop vac or
Like if
whatever
it's
they
going to
use?
be, what would it cost over a 10-year period or something, whatever that would be. I mean, because I'm guessing the technology is not quite there yet, but it's going to change pretty quickly. So my guess is in a year or so, we'll probably have better options, but we're kind of.
The vacuuming is fairly old school, as you would expect it to be. It's taking the big sewer vac and driving over the pavement to get all the sediment and fines out of it so it drains better again.
I guess part of my experience, and I walk that trail pretty regularly, is that we don't always keep it in a real high state of maintenance, which doesn't make it a lot different than other parts of the city. But Yeah, I guess I'd like to think of having solutions that are require, low maintenance in the future. It's just, that's an ongoing expense. We're not always good about it getting done in a timely fashion. So we may be creating more problems for ourselves in the future if we're not careful.
Well,
Mayor-
it sounds like we're trying to get some options.
Yeah, we're trying to get some options.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, any further comments? Okay, let's see, Denise and then Judith.
Mayor, we'll also see, Dole will reach out to CDOT this week and see if there are unintended consequences with that. If so, we'll bring it back January 3rd because that's a big financial implication. And we'll do that as quickly as possible if there are those. So we'll bring that back on January 3rd if such.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
So, thank you for, putting this together and also your willingness to look at some other options. It's my understanding, that these pervious surfaces are improving all the time and changing and more communities are adopting them. So I don't know where CDOT fits in, and I'm sure there's more than one kind of surface, and we can look at the pros and cons of more than one, as long as they are ADA compliant. But if it turns out that you come to council and we scratch our heads and go, at the end of the day, we took a good look at it and we're back at concrete, I'm just wondering if we can, reach out to this contractor and say, we're not, this is just on hold for a limited amount of time while we gather some more information. If that's possible, I'm just curious if how that works. So we don't have to necessarily tell this contract that it's dead in the water. We can tell them that council's just requesting a little bit more time.
We can. I mean, it depends on how it responds, but he did bid the work. He would like to build the project. So I think a little bit of time, especially this time of year, isn't too big of a delay. My experience with pervious pavement is generally when areas get redeveloped and there are new water quality standards that exist now in all the municipalities, MS4 requirements. And so a redevelopment, they're usually limited land. So one of the ways they meet new water quality requirements is by then the parking lot becomes pervious pavement. And so that's how they're able to justify the additional cost is, hey, if you want to build this new building, your parking lot needs to be converted to impervious areas. So the technology is always changing, but that's generally where I've seen it. I have not seen a multimodal trail have impervious pavement put in. So that we'll see what the data suggests.
Anybody else? Okay, John, I'm going to ask you again to restate your motion because we've had a lot of back and forth. So let's just do this and then we'll go ahead and vote. But
I
want
move
people to
we
be clear.
postpone this, until 60 days, because I think we have to have a date certain. With the caveat that if staff is ready for a report earlier, that essentially that they bring it forward with a report on the pervious nature of the trail surface. Okay. Some more information on tree removal. Okay. And what the ramifications to the bid would be if we would stop the work at marker 3+00 as that are in the plans.
Okay,
I'll second.
no, I was just asking to restate it
Oh,
so that we knew what we're talking about. Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
We have a 6-1 vote in favor. The one no vote is Mayor Pro Tem Fortune.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Dole.
Thank you.
Okay. That takes us to agenda item G. It's first reading of ordinance number 2322, an ordinance to adopt the land use and development code. So we have our planning department here and Logan Simpson.
Great, thank you, Mayor Graham. For the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen, Planning Director for City of Manitou Springs. Tonight, we are looking at a pretty big project. So we're at first reading of our land use and development code. The project has been going for about 2-ish years, and we're finally in the last couple of steps. So that's great. I just wanted to give a really quick intro before we dive into the presentation. Like you guys know, we went to work session in late October, October 25th. We took those comments and we presented them to the Planning Commission, who had a special hearing on November 17th. That was about a 3.5-ish hour meeting where they discussed and recommended a few revisions or suggested things for the city council to consider. Namely, those were about how to measure building height, the maximum building height in certain zone districts, maximum density in certain zone districts, parking requirements in the general residential zone, the variance criteria, and the definition of a household. Those were all presented in a report that was sent out about maybe a week and a half or so ago. And we did prepare a red line version of the LUDC that takes into account those proposed revisions in Planning Commission discussion. So tonight we're going to go through relatively the same format that we did for work session, which is we'll discuss chapter by chapter or a couple of chapters at a time what the LUDC says, just in case there's anybody online or watching this at some point that didn't hear it from the work session meeting. And then also if Planning Commission had any significant discussion over a topic within one of those chapters. I am prepared to take notes and make little edits. If there are any technical comments that I can just quickly change, I can go ahead and do that now. And then how I was thinking we could move forward is if there was a recommendation to approve with changes, we would prepare another red line version that would illustrate those changes recommended from this meeting with a final version. So you would be able to see the changes in another red line. And with that, I think we're ready to turn it on over.
And if I could ask one question too, or one request, in the red line version, of course, there are certain places where you embedded a little box of comments saying that this was it was a topic that the Planning Commission had discussed and had mixed emotions about. So I guess as you go through that, if for our benefit, you could perhaps elaborate on the nuances that might be appropriate.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. We can
All
do
right.
that.
Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and let them make the presentation, and we could kind of hold back on the questions until we get to some good stopping point. We'll look to you too for that. Okay.
Great, thank you. Jennifer Gardner with Logan Simpson. Thank you all for having me back again to talk about this lovely project. For those of you who are watching this presentation for the first time, we wanted to just remind everyone of kind of the path that we've taken to get where we are today. So this project did kick off in December of 2020 internally. That's when we signed our contract with the city. In 2021, early 2021, we kicked off the project with the community with a project kickoff meetings. We did an online open house, a series of online open houses. It was square in the middle of our pandemic, so we were not able to get out in person at the beginning. We did push out several online questionnaires as well. Stakeholder interviews, met with many members of the community, and started our assessment report. We also had a joint study session with Planning Commission and City Council to start to assess the existing code. Moving into June of 2021, once the code assessment was complete, we started having some topic-specific joint study sessions with Planning Commission and City Council, and we engaged with a working group of community members to start diving into specific sections of the code. At that time, we also reorganized the existing code into its new proposed organization. From September of 21 to July of 22, we had several working group meetings, really worked line by line through the code, proposed changes, looked at different aspects such as building height and density in some of the zone districts from many different aspects, and started to develop graphics to support the language. In August of 2022, earlier this year, we completed a final kind of draft of everything we've been working on with the working group to review for one last final round of edits. In September, that went out to the public. We had a public open house at that time and posted the document on Conveo for public comment. And then in October, we started our adoption process. We couldn't have done this effort without our outstanding working group. The 7 members you see on the screen here, some of them are here this evening and online. They dedicated over 500 volunteer hours. And if I could do a round of applause, I would, but over 30 meetings, 500 plus volunteer hours, they were paramount to this success of this project. Just kind of some additional numbers. Like I said, we had 2 open houses at the beginning of the project, or a series of 2 at the beginning and 1 here at the end. We met with 38 individual community members. We had 6 questionnaires with over 300 responses, 7 joint work sessions, and 12 meetings with advisory boards. So that 38 community member number does not include all of those advisory boards that we met with. So that just expands the number quite a bit. So just general updates. We did combine and reorganize all of the existing provisions in the subdivision and zoning codes, as well as the sign code that was pulled out of the building code. We've renamed this code. It's now the Land Use and Development Code. There's 7 chapters that we're going to go through this evening. We've added graphics and tables for clarity and different table of contents at the beginning of each chapter to help search through each chapter. Just a reminder of some of the top priorities that were identified at the beginning of this project to reorganize and simplify the existing provisions, add graphics and tables for ease of use, preserve Manitou character, provide basic commercial design standards, incorporate sustainability, improve the landscape standards, add parking in tandem with mobility, and then simplify the application procedures. So we're going to start on chapter 1. Chapter 1 is your general provisions. We combined existing language from titles 16 and 18, which are the zoning and subdivision codes currently. We added a severability clause that this whole section or this whole new title land use code can be looked at independent of the rest of the municipal code. We clarified non-conforming regulations with regards to conditional use language, historic districts, reference to lot of records, and added public acquisition provisions. And we added review and decision-making authorities. So these were not fully defined in your current code. There is some definition of them in the municipal code, but we've clearly defined what each of these roles are within the realm of this land use and development code. Chapter 2, chapter 2 combines all the zoning districts into one consolidated chapter. We've added at the front end a measurement section, since a lot of chapter 2 is relative to different building height and density and setback measurements. We've added a measurement section at the beginning as kind of a thesaurus or dictionary of how to interpret these different provisions. We added language regarding setbacks and building height. We did do quite a bit of clarification on the measurement of building height and added a section on accessory projections within that building height. So it allows for architectural features to extend 5 feet beyond the permitted building height, such as parapets, pipes, chimneys, roof-mounted solar, and HVAC equipment. It also allows church belfries to extend that 5 feet beyond the building height. And it's not allowed for a purpose of achieving an additional building height to the structural portion of the building. It's for additional appurtenances. The Planning Commission we can go to this slide. Planning Commission did have quite a bit of discussion on building height. We presented these 2 images to Planning Commission. The top image would be general representation of maybe looking down Manitou Avenue, looking at the buildings, how they're stepped back right along the front facade, and with looking on the south side of Manitou Avenue, where your slope goes up and buildings might be behind an additional building, you can kind of get a sense of what that height would look like for the next layer of building. The bottom image is a proposal that came about right before Planning Commission to look at building height in a little bit different way, rather than just an average of your highest and lowest points on the property. Looking at kind of a building envelope or a height envelope built off of the existing grade. So if you took the existing grade and elevated it up, say 30 feet, say if that was our building height, you could build within that distance and you could cut into the hillside as well. Planning Commission did like this approach and had made the recommendation for City Council to consider it as an option to our building height conversation. Additionally, in Chapter 2, we've added a provision for a density bonus, which would allow for our residential density to increase by 25% if 25% or more of the units provided were at a price that could be affordable by someone making 100% of the average median income. Zone districts, we did add a mixed use commercial zone district, which replaces your redevelopment overlay, allows for the building standards specific to the URA area. We did increase, the proposal increases the density from 15 to 25 DUs per acre. Lot coverage remains at 75% with some building incentives. We added a maximum front setback, so the building would have to be a certain distance from the Manitou Avenue, and clarified the development standards, which currently sit as footnotes. And I want to point out several things on this slide. So Planning Commission did suggest changing the maximum building height in the HDR zone to 30 feet. I know we're talking about mixed use commercial on this slide, but in the high density residential, we had proposed a height increase to, I think, 35 feet, and they had suggested bringing that back down to 30. They did suggest reducing the mixed use commercial density to 20 DUs per acre, which per your current code is what you can get with a development incentive. And then they've proposed removing the 4-foot additional height incentive that we added towards the end of this process. We added an additional incentive in the mixed use commercial for an additional 4 foot of building height, which could achieve 9-foot building height. They had suggested to remove that. I will say commission was split on that decision. There was quite a discussion on that, and there was not consensus. Just a couple of other images to help our conversation this evening, because no doubt we've had some discussion with Planning Commission and we'll hear as well on building height and density. Just some graphics and some imagery to illustrate what different densities might look like. We did present these, I think, about a little over a year ago at a meeting as well, but just brought them back out to see if that might help the conversation a little bit. And then the next one is a series of images just to kind of help visualize what 10 DUs per acre versus 40 versus 24 could look like in different scenarios.
And if I could make one additional, before we move on to Chapter 3, one additional comment from the Planning Commission was to make an addition to how two properties that maybe have different zone districts, how their setbacks relate to each other. So if you have a single family zone district next to a commercial or high density residential zone district, right now there's no special requirement that says that you need to transition this land use by spacing it out a little bit further, because that's a pretty intense land use transition. With the commission, the commission's recommendation was where you have differing zone districts next to each other, that the more intense zone district, or the one that's developing after the fact or after another land use, that it match the setbacks of the neighboring zone district. So for instance, if you have a high density residential product that is proposed next to a single family zone, that high density the high density project would need to match the setbacks of the single family zone district, which would be more greater than what the high density residential zone district would allow or would require. Now, if you had a high density residential district next to commercial zone districts, those are pretty similar. So there wouldn't necessarily be a need for a transition, but it's really between single family next to high density or next to commercial that this transition would become applicable. So that was a red line and an addition that was added to the version before you today. Yeah, we can pause for comments on chapters 1 and 2 now, or we can continue through depending on how you would like to move forward.
Let's just take a quick reading from council. Does anybody have some quick questions on chapters 1 or 2? Let's push on.
Oh, we do.
Well, I'm sorry, Natalie.
Yeah, I just, we don't need to do it now, but I just have some questions about the envelope. That's just new to me, so that's all, but we can talk about it later.
Okay.
Can you back up one slide? There we go. Okay. So chapter 3 is development standards, and this is a very lengthy chapter full of a lot of information. I'm going to go through kind of the components of this chapter, and then we can pause again and see if anyone has any questions. One of the new pieces that we've added in chapter 3 is commercial site and building design standards. And you all might remember that we have gone early in the process. We went back and forth a little bit about how much to add into the code and how much to pull out into maybe a design guidelines document. So we kept this fairly minimal, targeting just the things that collectively we really wanted to make sure were addressed. And then the design guidelines can address kind of the broader picture. So we've addressed building orientation, building height and scale. So we're looking at building step backs, like you can see in this graphic, where you go up a certain height and then the building has to step back a certain distance before it can go up again, to try to open up kind of that visual quality along a sidewalk. We've added a requirement for cool roofs as far as building materials. And we've added a little bit of language on development relative to Fountain Creek, and added a requirement for site amenities. I will note this graphic is in the code right now, and after discussion, this wasn't pegged specifically by Planning Commission, but during our conversation that Hannah was describing about the setbacks, it came to our we kind of highlighted the fact that this graphic, I think, needs to be dropped down. Instead of having 3 stories at the 28-foot max, I'd like to show 2 stories and then you extend up. So I just wanted to make some minor adjustments to this graphic to clarify that that dimension a little bit. And then one question that did sort of come up in Planning Commission was, do we want to address this same type of step back? We have it now at the front on commercial buildings. In the mixed use district, we would have it on the side. Do we also want to address this on the rear of the building so that the building would have to step down? And I think that ties hand in hand with the setbacks being a little bit more extended. This section includes exterior lighting. The current code only has language on lighting plan requirements. We've added requirements for full cutoff fixtures and regulated light levels in color, which gets us a little closer to dark sky lighting without being fully dark sky compliant. We've added quite a bit to the landscape standards. The existing code has the landscape plan requirements, which talk about a minimum number of trees on in a streetscape situation, street tree spacing, and then a minimum mix of plant material. We have added a new reference to a plant list. We've carried forward the landscape plan requirements, but adding a water usage identification. We have added vegetation preservation standards, which we were discussing with your last agenda item. Added a standard for specific areas such as streetscape, commercial, parking lot. So they each have their own individual landscape requirements now. And we've added screening and buffering standards. We added another new section on alternative energy standards. There isn't anything on this in your current code, so it's brand new. We've added electric vehicle charging infrastructure requirements, solar infrastructure requirements, and a sustainable site improvement standards and incentives menu, which will require all residential and non-residential development to achieve 5 points off of the menu. You can, for every additional 5 points beyond the required, you can have relief from the amenity space reduction. Some of the items on this menu include affordable housing, additional EV charging stations, low impact development, stormwater management, pervious pavement, which could be tied to LID, additional landscaping and tree requirements, native plant material requirements, options for rooftop gardens, and renewable energy systems. Mobility, we've kind of repurposed the term parking to mobility and capture a little bit broader picture. Your existing code does have a parking plan requirement, parking space standards, and then minimum number of off-street parking spaces. We've simplified the minimum off-street parking requirements down to a much smaller list based on the use categories. We've removed the minimum off-street parking requirement for downtown. We've added a maximum parking requirement, added alternative parking plan options to provide some flexibility, added shared parking standards, bicycle parking requirements, and low impact development standards. This is what the new parking table looks like. It actually fits on one page now. And I wanted to highlight a couple of items that Planning Commission brought forward for discussion. Since we've removed the parking requirement in downtown, there was a question of whether we should also remove the requirement in the general residential, which primarily sits surrounding downtown. And then second, we were looking at the short-term rental requirement as per the current draft and have proposed a change rather than 2 spaces per dwelling unit, change it to 1 space per bedroom for the first 2 bedrooms, and then a half a space per bedroom beyond those first 2. So just for conversation, I wanted to bring those up. All right, maybe we could pause here and see if there's any questions on chapter 3.
Questions, council? I think we can push on.
Perfect. Chapter 4 is combines all of the use regulations. So we've added a new use table, a multi-page use table, which has every single use that we've contemplated, whether it's permitted or conditional by zone district. New and updated uses, we've updated the permitted and conditional use allowances as appropriate, trying to reduce reliance on the conditional use permits where possible, given the additional standards that we've added throughout the code. And we've added new uses to address current trends such as mixed use dwellings, group homes, which was a combination of a couple of different existing uses, recreation, entertainment, maker spaces, breweries, workshops, transit facilities, recycling facilities, and some temporary uses.
Where are we authorizing a recycling facility to come in? What zone, is that for the entire city can have a recycling facility on the street, or is that just in a certain area?
We're
And
looking
why are
that
we
up.
doing
I
that?
think it might be in the public zone district.
Where's that?
Actually, we have it in commercial. We have it as a conditional use in the commercial zone district.
Oh, I thought I misunderstood. I thought the chart was saying these are things that no longer require a conditional use.
Oh, no,
Isn't that what it said? or did I
there's
miss
2
that?
different things on this slide. We have reduced the reliance on conditional uses in several aspects, but not that particular one. These are just new uses that we've added to the table based on
Those are new uses that are approved or that require conditional use?
some of them will require conditional and some will be permitted.
And you put them all together?
They're in different categories on the actual use table itself. We just wanted to highlight on this slide which uses are new to the code. Yep. Residential uses, many of these uses are existing in your current code. We've changed the terminology from single family dwellings to single household detached, 2 household duplex dwellings, mixed use dwellings, which currently are a very lengthy description about a residential above a main floor, and so we simplified that terminology. Multi-household instead of multi-family, mobile and manufactured home, I believe, is the same, and then group home, combined use homes, and some other terminology. Commercial zone districts, we really wanted to differentiate the commercial zone from downtown. So looking at some of the uses that are allowed in the commercial zone district, either permitted or conditionally, all dwelling types except for single household, group living, micro agriculture, most commercial and office uses, the marijuana uses, institutional and public uses, infrastructure uses, and many temporary uses. Short-term rentals, this section was largely carried over from your current code. We did change the application process from a conditional use to a specific short-term rental permit. The existing conditional use permits do not change per this code. The 2% saturation and 500-foot separation still apply as well. There was some discussion at the Planning Commission hearing about adding some language from the existing purpose statement in the current code to become criteria for approval, to try to help so that it's not just a check the box, you've met all the requirements. So these two items are being considered for conditions of or for criteria for approval, that it does not adversely impact surrounding uses and does not encroach upon traditional neighborhood character. Chapter 5 is much simplified. This is your subdivision regulations. We've moved all the procedural language to Chapter 6, modernized the purpose statement, added clarification to the applicability. We added clarification to the flag lot definitions and requirements and provided some graphics to help illustrate that. Clarified when and how improvement guarantees are used and updated the land dedication requirements slightly. We created a new procedures table for Chapter 6. This quite possibly is Hannah's favorite part of the project. So really just goes down every single application, whether there's a pre-application meeting, you know, who is the reviewing, the review authority, and then what type of noticing is required. And then that's supplemented with specific procedures for each application. So we've clarified the public notice procedures, condensed and clarified all of that. Added a public notice for application. So when an application is received by the planning department, they can submit notice that an application is in hand. We replaced the minor conditional use with a specific short-term rental application, which negated the need for the minor and major. So now major just becomes conditional use. We updated the subdivision plat decision-making authority to administrative, since there's additional review at Planning Commission and City Council through the development plan, and added a waiver of replat process. I'll also note that we've updated the variance criteria quite a bit. So we developed more specific criteria with 2 required criteria and then 7 that you have to meet 5 of the 7 criteria. Well, it's changing. So yeah. So there was discussion at our City Council work session about dropping F2, and Planning Commission, well, they did not like that suggestion. So I just had to note that, but they did suggest removing F5, and I can pull up the exact language if we need to. F5 is the existence of a non-conforming structure shall not be considered grounds for the issuance of a variance. And if we remove F5, they suggested changing it to 4 out of 6 instead of 5 out of 6 if we drop that one. And then Chapter 7 is our last chapter, the definitions. We have moved all definitions from all of our different code pieces into one place. The use definitions are in the use chapter, but the defined terms are in the definitions chapter. Sign code definitions have been rolled in as well in their own section. We've removed all standards from definitions. So if there was a standard that said a building could only be so many feet from something, we've removed that so there isn't inconsistency. We've better defined accessory structures as temporary accessory structures and permanent accessory structures, and reviewed and updated telecommunication definitions. Planning Commission suggested adding a few definitions, which we've added in the red line draft, of cool roof, density, dwelling units per acre, and then one item we still need to add as a graphic to represent top of bank. And the final discussion was on the definition of household. We have your current definition up here. There was quite a discussion with Planning Commission on this definition, and it resulted in basically 3 options. We could either remove the unrelated language. So the issue that keeps coming up is the section that says, or a group not in excess of 5 persons living together as a single housekeeping unit. So that a household is people that are related and then these 5 unrelated. So one suggestion was just to remove the unrelated language and simplify the definition to people living together as a single housekeeping unit. Another option was to increase the number of unrelated to 6. We tossed around several numbers from 6 to 8, looking at several other communities' definitions. And then alternately, we could tie the definition to the housing code for capacity, which does have a certain number of people per bedroom described. I have a couple more slides. Oh, yes.
Go ahead, Julie.
So the first paragraph under currently proposed definition. So I don't know how you define domestic partnership, but if I have a roommate and sometimes we have sex and sometimes we don't, then we're not a household. 2 or more, we're not related by blood marriage. What's the point of all the blood marriage, adoption, guardianship, other duly authorized custodial relationships, official public records? What is that supposed to be? I mean, what's the point? I mean, that includes some people and excludes others. Who cares? I mean, what's the point? I don't mean to be rude.
No,
I don't understand why that would be the currently proposed definition.
And that's exactly the discussion that's been going on.
But the people who are proposing this, what was their argument? What was their reason? It's currently proposed. You can tell us why.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with the current code, we do define a family. And that's mostly to make sure that like a single family home doesn't become an apartment, so to speak, where you have several individuals living and renting bedroom by bedroom. So currently in the code, there's no limit to the number of unrelated individuals that can reside in a home. By law, we can't say that you can only have 5 related family members. It's any number of people who are related by blood marriage in that list of things. But then there is no limit to number of unrelated folks. So you do end up with some homes that have quite a number of folks living in them saying that they are a single housekeeping unit. And so the code committee felt that we should put some type of cap on the number of unrelated individuals residing as a single housekeeping unit. And frequently 5 is that number. It's a pretty common number across cities. It's what Colorado Springs uses. It's what cities that I worked for back in Arizona use. And it really depends on the city. The Planning Commission particularly felt that 5 was very restrictive. And so they had conversations about, well, maybe is it such an issue for our city to allow any number of unrelated folks living as a single housekeeping unit? Or do we need to increase that number so that we still have some level of control over a boarding home, so to speak? Or should we tie it to the housing code? So the code committee, essentially how we landed here is the code committee felt that there should be a cap, whereas the code right now does not have one. Planning Commission felt that the cap proposed was a little too restrictive, but still felt that maybe there is a purpose there. I would say this was the topic that we discussed the most at Planning Commission. So that's where we've landed.
So can I ask you, so for example, you can't, like, say a bunch of college kids want to rent a house, only 5 of them can rent. So if I have a 3-bedroom house and they have, 2 people in each room, that would be illegal. Somebody has to get rid of their girlfriend, right? You can't have 3 couples in a house.
That would be correct under the current proposed definition.
You only have 5,
Mhm.
unless they get married. Or they could tell you they're common law married and then they're fine and you don't need any proof of that. So since anyone can say they're common law married these days, unless you're under 18, I don't know that it's going to be that effective, but anyway, I'll stop. That helps me understand that. Great, thank you.
Of course.
All right, and this might help provide some.
Mr. Shade, I
Oh,
think
yes.
has a question and then we can get
Does
back.
anybody in the city know whether we've had a problem in this area?
A couple of instances were brought up by code committee members. For example, there's a home in the city of Manitou Springs that a particular religious group, is my understanding of who they are, live in a couple of homes and exceed what we're proposing here. However, because they are calling themselves a single housekeeping unit, they are in compliance with our current code. There also has been a situation where there was a home that had like 12 bedrooms or something like that. And it was being rented out to groups of like 20 people. That creating some level of havoc on the neighborhood with number of cars, traffic, things that are caused by large groups of people. So it was instances like that because they can call themselves a single housekeeping unit. It right now would be permitted. So by adding that cap of 5 or some number, that does give the city some level of enforcement ability when there is a group of individuals that maybe is having an impact on the neighborhood negatively or something along those lines.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to not be taking audience comments tonight. Yeah, no, that's okay. Okay, no, thank you. I hadn't noticed that. Okay.
Right. And so the next few slides do dive into what other cities are doing so that we could provide a larger picture, because we know that this topic is a little bit, well, it's a topic that we need to decide what direction we want to go in. And so I'll turn that back over.
Yeah, great. So if we've kind of categorized these on the next 3 slides. The 4 cities you see in front of you just talk about relationship by blood, marriage, adoption. So relationship to each other. They do not include the additional unrelated members of the household. Fort Collins actually just recently dropped that because it was hard to enforce. Fort Collins is a much bigger city, so it was a little bit more difficult on the enforcement side. And Salida has a fairly recent code. They're going through an updated code update right now. They do actually have 5 unrelated. Seattle has 8 or fewer non-related folks. So you can kind of see the breadth here. If we go to the next slide, in Breckenridge and Denver, Denver actually pulled their definition of household or family from the zoning code, and it's a municipal code regulation now. And they define it as a household is people who live together as a family or as a functional equivalent of a family. And then they go into more detail. And then they allow up to 5 adults of any relationship plus their minors. So I thought that was an interesting nuance. And as you can see in Breckenridge, similarly, they define a household as living together as a single housekeeping unit. And you'll see this repeated in a few of these. And they allow up to 8, again, adults. So they're specifying adults versus just 8 unrelated people.
So the number we ultimately choose on this, unless there's some kind of exception, would apply as well to the group homes?
Group homes can be an exception to that.
Oh, that would be an exception, because I was going to say, how many people do they usually cram into a group home?
8 adults.
8?
Yeah.
The other thing is, have any of the cities approached this by number of people per bedroom as opposed to per house? Because it seems to me if you have a 6-bedroom house, then having no more than 5 people might be fine. But if I have a 1-bedroom house and I've got 5 unrelated people, 5 children and 2 married people, that's going to be a nightmare. So do any of the cities look at bedrooms?
Yes, and I think actually maybe our next slide does.
Oh.
If we could go one more slide. So the Minneapolis and Los Angeles actually just define it as living as a single housekeeping unit. And then they further tie to their building code. So it's just defined as that housekeeping unit. They don't define a capacity or occupancy. And then the occupancy is spelled out in their building code, which is one way that a lot of communities are going to try to help the enforceability of the unrelated, as you can see here, even this evening and in that planning commission discussion, it's a very, seems arbitrary to decide if it's 5, is it 6, is it 8? It depends on the bedrooms. So that's why a lot of the newer codes are coming out with just living together as a single housekeeping unit and defining what that is. And then leaving it to building code to define the occupancy. So I hope that gives some, I mean, as you can see, it's all over the board as to how the definition is treated.
Mr. Shada.
Did anybody approach it from the standpoint? It seemed like to me you hinted at this as terms of the neighborhood impact as far as like number of cars, things like that.
No, not to my knowledge. Nobody's indicated it based on number of cars.
Okay,
So-
so, but I thought you did say there was some, in one of these slides, you talked about somehow neighborhood impact, did you not? Or am I hearing things? I'm
Look,
sorry.
okay, I think that was back on a different slide.
Okay,
So the slide that you're mentioning was related to the short-term rental permit. So that gives them or gives the planning commission some level of subjectivity to their decision versus just checking boxes. But I did mention that one of the reasons the cap was added to the proposed version was to help mitigate potential impacts such as an overrun of vehicles or traffic.
well, and okay, so I thank you very much for helping me tie where I saw that back there and going through this. So is that possibly kind of an approach we could take in terms of thinking about it? If essentially you've got, 2 adults, okay, in a 6-bedroom house, okay, it would seem like to me the neighborhood impact would be almost non-existent or very minimal if essentially there was only 1 car that the household unit used. But if suddenly each one of these 6 bedrooms has a car with it, I can suddenly see how 6 cars, especially in a lot of our neighborhoods in Manitou Springs, could put a huge burden on essentially that immediate neighborhood. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to figure this out from the standpoint of that kind of external impact? Okay. And is that something that would alleviate us from having to have numbers here as opposed to tying number of cars per, I don't know, linear foot in frontage of the building or something like that, or how many parking spaces that you have, that kind of thing. I'm just trying to figure out kind of neighborhood impact, if there's a way to slice and dice this, because it looks like everybody's really struggling with this. And I can imagine in a college community, this is really a difficult thing. So I think this is an ongoing discussion in Boulder, and I'm sure in Fort Collins, which are highly impacted by essentially, people who are not even likely in this funky definition of a family unit, right? You know what I mean? They're just all trying to rent a room, correct?
Right. Yeah, I will say when I was going to school at Arizona State, the limit was 3. So I know college towns definitely struggle with this. So you couldn't have a house rented by more than 3 college kids essentially. But I would have, and this is just my professional opinion, and I'm here to enforce whatever the council decides it's best for Manitou Springs. But my concern would be that you can have a family of like 2 people who are hobby collectors of cars. And so maybe they do have multiple vehicles beyond what they essentially need day to day. And maybe their garage accommodates this or something along those lines. Or you could have a family of 10 people who are all related by blood, and they are allowed to live in that home as a family. And maybe they do need 10 vehicles to get to their various jobs, this, that, and the other. And maybe they're able to accommodate those vehicles on their property or through like a parking permit or something like that. I would have a little bit of hesitation tying the definition to availability of parking or number of vehicles, just because the purchase and sale of vehicles happen so quickly. But the number of bedrooms might be one of the ways to get to that same result. Or, I mean, there are homes in Manitou Springs that have 12 bedrooms. So that still would be a lot of people living in a home potentially. So those are just my thoughts on that particular suggestion.
Thank you. Other council members on this topic? Maybe something else. Okay, so are you finished with, this concludes your presentation?
Yep, we just
Is
wanted
that-
to highlight a couple of upcoming steps and then we are concluded. So
Okay, how long do you think that'll take?
like 2 seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, because I think maybe we typically take a break about this time,
Okay.
so let's you go ahead and finish and then we'll kind of see what council's druthers are and probably take a break after that. Okay, thank you.
Perfect, yeah. Timing is perfect, I guess, then. So following this meeting, as Hannah highlighted it at the beginning, we can do an additional red line document on any suggestions that come out of this evening. We're scheduled for a second reading of this on January 3rd. And then our next step is to work on updating the application checklists and FAQ documents. So we'll be working on that through January, maybe into February.
Thank you. Hannah, did you have anything more right now or what you wanted to add?
Just a couple of minor closing comments. So I just want to highlight that even though this is code, it is law, it is in a way a living document. So even if we propose things tonight and we find that, you know, it's something is just not getting us where we need to go or where we were hoping to go, or it doesn't accomplish what we thought it would, we can always come back and change it. So I'm proposing that at the 6-month mark, we come back and we do an assessment on whether we think that this is working, if we've had enough projects to base an opinion on, and any technical changes. I mean, we'll always miss 1 or 2 words. I mean, that's always going to happen. And then at the 12-month mark, come back for any substantive changes. So if a major development came through and we were like, oh, dang, we didn't think about this. Maybe we need to add this in, or maybe we need to reel this back or make this more intense. We can always come back and do that. So I'm proposing 2 milestones, 1 at the 6-month mark, and then a serious review of a period with a period of performance at the 12-month mark to make sure it's working. And that's
Okay.
it.
Thank you. John, you had a comment?
I just have a procedural issue. I think as you were going through these slides, you made some comments that there were some little changes that are what, in the slides that are not in the packet. Is that true? Did I mishear something?
I apologize. I think, or everything that was presented today is in the red line and should be in the packet. So maybe something was accidentally missaid.
So there wasn't anything up here on these slides. I thought you said that is not in the packet.
Correct.
I
It should
just
all
wanna
be in the
just-
packet.
I just
Yep.
want to procedurally, thank you,
Yep.
thank you.
Council, I'd kind of like get a sense of where we're at with this. Personally, I'm pretty happy with this. I do have a few things like building heights that I'd like to discuss a little bit more, but I'd like to see what council's what your interests are and what you'd like to get done tonight. We will, of course, have another meeting to discuss this January the 3rd. And of course, that will probably be longer insofar as we anticipate getting some public comment. So Julie, what are your thoughts as to where we're at now?
Well, I think this group has made tremendous progress. And I really have to hand it to you, Hannah, for jumping into this job with this being in the middle, and oh my goodness. So it's very impressive. And I too have a few things that I'd want to address, but overall, I think it looks great. And I cringed a little bit when I heard the no substantial changes until 12 months, because I thought, oh, that might be too late, you know, for a big development that we are unhappy with. But then I realized we can always come back and revise anything anytime if there's a majority decision to do so. So I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, good. Thank you, Julie. Natalie?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with this document and I have a few things to discuss if they come up. And I just also wanted to just kind of remind us that we also have this code committee who's really informed. And if we need to use them at the 1-year mark and have them bring forward some recommendations and things, I think we do have this great group of people that I think would be willing to reinvest their dedication at various points if needed.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. John?
I too want to make sure that we have as conservative of height things. I think this has bit us too many times before. My only other comment is, I guess my biggest stomach ache with kind of where we're headed is what I would call with our incentive scheme to accommodate low income. And I believe instead of creating things where on the backs of low income people, we end up with bigger massing structures, okay? That is not what our neighborhoods want, okay? I do not think that's a fair incentivization, okay? To take the needs of low income people. To me, we just had a discussion about ADA things. And I think we ought to get back to some fundamental kind of basically kind of human rights and diversity things. That if we really fundamentally believe as a community that we ought to be accommodating diversity in terms of income, okay, and means, then I believe those ought to be standards. And we say when there's 8 units, there's at least 1 that is low income. There's maybe 2 that is medium income, and the developer can pick what they want to do with the other ones. Make them all low income or all just, you know, luxury units. But to me, that's my biggest pain about this is that in reality, okay, the trade-off, what we're going to end up with is big, huge, massive projects, okay, that have more impermeable surfaces, okay, put more demands on essentially the neighborhood in terms of for parking and traffic, all because we're incentivizing. Why are we saying that low income should be incentivized? Why don't we just make that our standard that says that when you do 8 things, you're going to build a certain proportion of housing, okay? And that's essentially my pitch. Is that I just don't think the incentivization scheme is a fair trade-off to a neighborhood. I think a neighborhood comes back at it and looks at it and goes, oh, wow, the developer picked this incentive scheme and now we have a monster truck, okay? All on the backs of accommodating people who have fundamental housing needs. I think it ought to be a standard. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Michelle?
I want to thank you. I have questions regarding the building heights, but everything else looks good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
Yeah, I also want to commend both of you sitting here and also the planning commission and the everyone that worked on the code committee. A phenomenal document. I do have some concerns and questions about height, setbacks. I also have the same, wanted to express the same concern about the affordable housing issue. And I also want to talk about how we got away from dark sky compliance. So those will be my issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, I think that this has been through an incredibly rigorous process with a lot of very committed people. So I'm at this point just interested in resolving any questions that staff may still have to get this completed and get it done and out there.
Great, thank you. And I'm also interested in getting this done. I think the caliber work that's gone into this has really been at a very high level. You know, I want to thank the committee that worked on this and Hannah, you and Jennifer. This is a much better product than I think we'd envisioned a couple years ago. And I think historically this has been talked about for maybe 20 years, or it's been a long time, and it's been such a daunting process, or, you know, that nobody really tackled it. So it speaks to, you know, a lot of fortitude here on a number of people. My questions, I think, are also building height and yeah, I guess I'd ask a friend of mine who's a builder, you know, how high should you allow a house or a structure to be built? And he says, we'll never build it higher than the fire department's ladder. So that was kind of an insight for me. So I would probably be inclined to go lower rather than higher, 30 feet instead of 35 or 35 instead of 39, depending on where we're at. So I could see carrying that discussion forward a little bit. I think the proposal that you have, the height envelope, and that's, I think, an intriguing thing. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I noticed in one of the proposals here, I think it's in the commercial area, the building could take 75% of the lot size, or it could take 90 if there was a 15% allowance for like permeable surfaces. That seemed to be kind of an oddball amount. That doesn't seem like a whole lot of permeable surface. So I would kind of be inclined to discount that. In general, I'm afraid that too often communities, cities, we incentivize developers and then we end up losing our personality. A good example is just get in your car and drive east into Colorado Springs. The farther you drive, the less personality it has. You get out to about Union Boulevard, in my mind, it's pretty much any other city anywhere in America. It's strip malls and cookie cutter houses. And I think Manitou wants to protect its personality. I think a lot of this work certainly endorses that. So I'd be inclined to move the discussion into a little more detail. That doesn't necessarily have to be tonight. With that said, how about we take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and figure out what we want to do next. Hey, council, I had a chance to talk to several of you just briefly during the break, and it seems like there's an interest in continuing with this discussion for a little while at least. So let's just go around the table. And I will mention that we have the additional business we have to get to tonight. Review of the employee handbook. I don't think that's going to be a hugely involved thing. We have two executive sessions, one performance review of the city clerk and the other performance review of the police chief. I'll leave it to you as to think how long that might take. So we do have, we have a little more time this evening if we wanted to give it to the land use development code subject. It might be time well spent. So Michelle, would you be willing to continue the discussion? Okay, Judith? Nancy? John? Natalie? Okay.
A question though, if we do want to dive in more, is it possible to approve this with taking out the areas we want to spend more time on and actually dive in more later? Like, because I feel like the timing is important, but I'm just throwing that out there. I don't want us to do that. I'm just curious if that's an option to
Okay,
approve it with.
Okay, so when it's finally passed, whenever that is, potentially January the 3rd, we still have the option to go back and change it. And as Hannah had suggested,
Mhm.
In 6 months, we may find out some things.
What
that
about
need to
like
be
1
tweaked.
week after?
Well,
I mean, that's what I'm asking essentially, right? Is if there's one area we want to spend some time on and we can't do it tonight, I just don't
Right.
want to.
No, I understand. So we do have some latitude to modify it. And we don't have to do it quickly. I think it's better to do it correctly, and to be reasonably thorough. That said, we could spend the rest of our lives, I suppose, nursing things out. Well, let's see how far we can get here in the next. Let's go for 45 minutes. Okay. I think we could be productive for 45 minutes, and then we can see how much we want to come back and visit on the 3rd, unless somebody's got a better idea. Okay, so let's continue discussion till 8:45. Okay, several things I heard were, okay, height, setbacks was another topic. Dark skies was one. Judith, did you have something else?
Density.
Density, okay, density is a good topic.
And the affordable housing discussion.
In affordable housing. Okay,
I'm sorry, Mayor, I'm not sure if the definition of household, if we needed to work on that too, I would add that.
definition of households. We've got approximately 6 things to talk about. Okay. How about we start with density? Anybody? Is that okay? Okay, let's go with density. Who wants to kick it off? Questions? Julie.
This is somewhat repeating what John Shada said already, but I don't think density should be increased as a prize for doing things that we want people to do, like, using the right materials on the right surface. I think we should mandate what we want to be mandatory. Permeable surfaces or whatever it is, or the electric station. Whatever it is, we should mandate it, but I don't believe density should be increased as a prize for offering low-income housing or for, putting a few pavers in or something.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, your thoughts on density?
I'm comfortable with the 30 that we proposed. I don't know, I did some research and I think when we look at communities that have things that we don't like, their density is more like 70. I do think that changing the density to something less would impact affordability, but I also feel like some of this conversation feels a little arbitrary. And I wouldn't mind diving in and doing some kind of a study on affordable housing or attainable housing and what it looks like in this community so that we're looking at realistic numbers and not just feeling one way or another about it. So.
Okay. John?
I guess my comment on the study thing is I haven't seen any studies that got us to this incentive thing that we have. Is there any studies that the group looked at?
Perhaps Hannah or Jennifer, maybe.
Yes, our code group, we had a subcommittee that did do some extensive research on the affordable housing that resulted in the numbers that you see in here.
Okay, so what were the studies? Can you send those to me?
We can go back in the notes and see what I believe led to this decision was a research of a bunch of cities and how they tackle affordable housing. And so it wasn't necessarily a recommendation out of a study solely, but that what other cities have based their decisions on and all the information they had to base their decisions on.
Okay, so I didn't mean to jump on top of you. I'm sorry. I'll let you finish.
I was just going to say, so it was probably a conglomerate of a lot of elements that led to the recommendation.
Okay, so my comment on the study thing is, and I come at this, okay, I used to be area director for Habitat for Humanity, okay? And you get what you ask for, okay? So if you allow the market, okay, to just spin, okay, you're going to end up with big 3,000 square foot, nearly $1 million things that are completely inaccessible, okay, to starting families, okay, people who are working full-time, but they don't make a lot of money, okay? And my other comment is, I realize other cities that are doing these things, and my comment is, as a country, it is not working. It is not working, all right? None of these places, okay, that maybe have these things, I know of no city, okay, that is using these incentive things and which is materially changing, okay, their affordability. The upside, the downside to doing this of just requiring it is we may have no takers. And my comment is, hey, after a year and we have a whole bunch of feedback and whatnot, we can go back and change this. But I guess I would rather approach it with what are our community values and operating from that standpoint rather than the downside, which is to end up with a project in which is way too big, okay? So that's my comment about the study thing, is that if we firmly believe that we can go back and change this, okay, why not make a change that is what we want to see, okay, without the downside? That's my comment.
Okay, thank you, John. Michelle, your thoughts on density?
My sentiments are with John Shada.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, on page 9 of the red line version, I just want to go on record as saying I completely support the Planning Commission request that adjacent properties that are zoned differently, the most restrictive setbacks and height variances between the two zones shall apply. I totally support that. And I also support the this would be page 10, the height following the land slope. I support that. That makes sense to me. So when we're talking about height, and this is going to come as no surprise to anyone because I've been saying this all along and I'm not going to change, is that regardless of the zone, I will support the more restrictive height and setback and density per acre. And why would I do that? So in the high density residential, I'm supporting 30, not 35. When I look at the Holiday Inn, which I think is either 39 or 40 feet, I keep that in mind when I'm looking at this. In the memorandum, you said that this code was going to really help to enhance, us viewing the view shed. I don't see where a 39, 40 foot, 45 foot it's going to obliterate our view shed. So to me, we already have parking, congestion, traffic. We already have these as integral problems that we're dealing with. And I'm not sure why we would, at this stage, we can go back later and review it. If it's not sufficient, we can always go higher and bigger, but we can't go smaller once we're out there and developers are going, yeah, we want to do this. So I'd like to see us start with the most restrictive of all of those in every single zone. Look at it in 6 to 12 months and say, where are we? So I'm there. With regards to the dark sky issue, because we started with this was going to be dark sky compliant, and now we backed off on that. But the mayor did remind me that we might be bringing a dark sky ordinance. So if we're going to do that, I am okay with putting that on the back burner and staying with heights and setbacks and so forth. And I do really agree with Councilor Shada with regarding the affordable housing and other incentives. I mean, I'm really opposed to a commercial building taking up 90% of a lot, you know, by having a little tiny driveway that's, you know, got a pervious surface. I think that, again, I'm going to support the more restrictive of the recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you. Nancy?
I'm just listening at this point.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know you're not feeling well, so my sympathies. I was there last week. Okay, yeah, I think my sentiments are similar to what we've just heard. I would be more inclined to have a more restrictive approach to both height and setbacks. I guess I'm more concerned about height. And I forget, we've got so many different zones. I think one of the proposals was 39 feet high. I think that was maybe in the mixed use area, basically the URA. 35 feet is still pretty massive in my mind. I wouldn't even mind something smaller. In terms of, and I guess in terms of density, I think in the mixed use area, they were talking about 20 dwelling units per acre, and maybe tying that to attainable housing. I'm thinking like Taos Village is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 dwelling units per acre to kind of get an idea of scale there. So I question what the URA would look like. I can understand the challenges of attainable or affordable housing. Again, I would be inclined to go with shorter buildings rather than tall ones. Our experience with the Holiday Inn is, you know, we should learn something from that, and we should learn something from the 3-story, I guess they're townhomes down on Becker's Lane, there by Becker's Lane, El Paso. If I lived across the street from those places, I think I'd really be upset about the view that was taken away from me. And then also the idea of increasing a lot size to 95 or to 90%, the footprint covering the lot, that disturbs me. I think the Holiday Inn is somewhere in the neighborhood of 75%, maybe a little less than that. If we allow a building to do 90% by promising to give up 15% of their parking or turning that into permeable space, I think we're setting that up for the developers to take advantage of us. So those are kind of my quick thoughts. Okay. Council, I guess that was supposed to be mainly a discussion on density, but we had a couple of other topics.
I just want to do a quick correction because the Taos Village where I live, my home is 2,000 square feet. So those are really large units.
Okay.
So when you talk about 15 per, I'm just saying that they're large. These are not small.
Okay. What do you think the dwelling units per acre is?
Well, so you said it was 15, the density was 15.
That's
yeah. And I'm just saying those are very large units. That's all. If you're talking about 15, 2,000 square foot units, those are large units.
Okay.
That's all.
This maybe is a little unfair, but Hannah, can you give us an idea of an existing structure in Manitou and the density, just so we have kind of a benchmark? If you can't, then I shouldn't even ask the question, but.
I could easily find an example. I don't want to spitball and give you a wrong impression.
Yeah.
I could look at the Creek Walk townhomes, which are just down on El Paso here. That could be a good example of what a townhome development density might look like.
Okay, and I realized one slide you had, I think you had 3 examples of different densities, but it's a little hard to make that correspond to something that we actually know. So, okay.
Yeah, and actually I can weigh in. We did a study in downtown. I know that's downtown specific and a little bit different, but we did a study of all the residential units in the downtown zone district that are all mixed use. So they would be a unit above retail or behind retail or somehow mixed in that fashion. We were seeing anywhere from 20 dwelling units per acre to 90. So you have to think about it on a small parcel. A lot of the 90s, 80s and 90s were actually only 2 units above a retail, but it was just on a really small parcel. So just for comparison, when you're thinking about density, I always keep that in mind as well as, you know, if you have retail on the bottom and residential above, you can actually, and I think Natalie was starting to get at that. If you have smaller units on a smaller footprint, you can actually get a really high density, which impacts parking and a lot of other things.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Sorry, I didn't mean to confuse things, but sometimes it just happens. Okay. Well, it does. Okay. We talked density. We want to talk. Okay, Judith.
If this will simplify things, and it may not, I think generally what I'm hearing is that we're not having any heartburn about the general residential or low density residential. It's mostly the commercial zones that we're talking about. And so I don't know if we want to just, just go to that and just look at them and just have a discussion of each of those zones and see if we can come to some consensus. I don't know if that would help, but it seems to me that there are specific zones that we are particularly concerned with. So the high density residential and the commercial zones in particular. So I don't know if I'm reading the room right or not, but anyway, with the high density residential, I propose 30, not 35 feet, and the setback of, I believe it's, I'm sorry, the density of 15 and the setback is 15. And I believe that's our current code. That's our current code, right?
Your current code is 15 dwelling units per acre and 30 feet height.
So that would
For
be
HDR.
no change from our current code for that. 15, I think it's 15.
I just had it up. Let me grab that again.
So we're going to wait for an answer and then we'll
And
hear
this
from
is
John.
15 of page 233. It's 15 on the red line version if 16.
Okay. So Jennifer, did
what
you come up
page
with an answer?
was
or-
that again?
So on the red line version I'm on 16, 15 and 16 of 233. It's the high density residential and it's got the notes from the planning commission on 16. And the planning commission suggested reversing the maximum building height for HDR back to 30 feet per existing code, and I support that.
Did you find that, John?
I mean, so that is there any way for people who are following this that you give the page number in the packet?
Oh, I'm looking at the Civic Plus packet, but I'm not sure. Do you have I could pull up both.
Well,
I have this.
well, the packet has 2 page numbers. It has blue that is, I believe, the code. And then there's a page number in terms of the packet page number.
Right. So where I am in our Civic Clerk packet, I'm on the LUDC red line version, so that the third bar down, and it's 16,
Page 16.
page 16.
Thank you.
16 of
Of
233.
233.
Yeah, so
Um,
that should help anyone who's following along at home to figure out what we're talking about.
But between 15 and 16, it has both, it has the density, the front setbacks and the height, which I think sounds to me like are the most concerning issues.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so to recap, Judith, you're saying 35 feet high,
30.
excuse me, 30 and
Basically, no change from existing code.
from existing, yeah, okay.
30 feet high, 15 front setback and 15 units per acre.
And I will note, we
The
did
dwelling units.
change, sorry, we
Go
did
ahead.
change the side setbacks. We increased the side setbacks, but we did not change the front and rear setbacks. And we increased the side setback for the temporary accessory structures. It was 3 feet and we extended that to 5 feet. And so if
Thank you.
anything, we went more restrictive.
Okay. I'm sorry, could you say that again, Judith?
Did everybody find it? Everybody, okay.
Yeah, I mean, everybody who was wanted to find it, found it. Okay, good. Okay, so that would be your thought on that's high density residential. That's height, setback, and density. Okay. Okay, council, maybe if we just speak to this particular topic, the high density residential, are we okay with that? You know, I like what Councilor Chandler proposed, basically leaving it where we're at now.
I have a question for you, Mayor, if I may.
Sure.
You mentioned something about I'd even consider going under 30 feet. Was that with respect to the high density residential zone, or were you referring to something else?
I was referring to the URA area,
I see.
the MUC, mixed
Also,
use.
we're not on that yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're not on that one right now, no.
Well, then since I'm on the mic, I'll just say, I certainly wouldn't want to go above the 30 feet that the code currently provides. And I appreciate the additional side setback.
Okay. It would appear that council's comfortable with those, so if that could be incorporated into the next version.
Just to make sure that we heard you correctly, for the high density residential zone only, we're reverting any changes back to as it currently is, minus or leaving the additional side setback the way it's proposed at 5 feet. So that would be a reduction of the maximum building height to 30 feet, a reduction in the density to 15 dwelling units per acre.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Is that also council's understanding? Okay, we're on board with that.
Great,
So
thank
for
you.
clarification purposes, so people who are following along on page 16 of 233, it seems like we're only changing maximum building height to 30 feet. Is that not correct on that page?
I apologize. Yes, that's correct. So the maximum residential density in the red line is already at 15 dwelling units per acre. So it would just be the height.
The height, okay. And then it would be also changing the illustration of 180223-1, correct?
That's correct. We would update the graphic.
Thank you.
But we're keeping the side setbacks, the more restrictive side setbacks also.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, it seems maybe we should just go by zone and then discuss the, okay. Go for the trifecta. We'll figure out the height, the density and the coverage. Okay. So, Hannah, you go ahead and pick the next zone category you want us to take a look at. We'll
Yeah,
get 'em all.
absolutely. So I know that the next hot topic is the mixed use commercial. So let's go ahead and tackle that one.
Okay. And if you have the page number, the reference, we'll all look it up.
Yeah, let me get to that real quick. Page 23. It starts, the mixed use commercial zone district technically starts on page 22, but the dimensional standards we're talking about start on page 23.
Okay, great. So anyone who's following this at home, it would be page 23 of 233 in the redlined land use development code. Okay. Was the planning commission, this was one they didn't have too much heartburn with, is that dissension?
So the planning commission essentially felt that, and it mimics a lot of the sentiment that I'm hearing from the city council, where there was concern about the incentive for the 39-foot structure. Really, the thought process behind that was if you have ground floor commercial, the ground floor commercial tends to have a higher ceiling height than residential. And so those additional 4 feet would allow for that ground floor commercial. However, we're still seeing that type of development with the 35-foot height that it currently exists in that zone district. It was just a way to help incentivize that type of development. So there was a concern about having that incentive, which I'm also hearing from the city council. And I'm just reading through the notes real quick. And lowering the density to 20 dwelling units per acre from the proposed 25 dwelling units per acre.
John, I think this was an area that you'd spoken to, so would you like to talk about this a little bit, kick it off?
So I just want to clarify in terms of what page we're on. Are we really talking about this yellow stuff on page 24? In the notes from the planning commission on 24 of draft V2?
That's
Is that what we're
correct.
talking?
So the planning commission discussion is on page 24. However, I know that city council will probably also want to discuss the last line on page 23, which is that 90% lot
Exactly.
coverage.
Exactly. So maybe we ought to start with on page 23, this maximum lot coverage thing. Okay.
Okay.
Site development standards, correct? Maximum lot coverage, 90. So here's this crazy incentive thing. Okay. Incentive award. Okay. Which is 90% if a minimum of 15% of paved surfaces incorporate pervious pavement. So I think there was some discussion, and I've heard some things about how this could be kind of manipulated, okay, to something that I don't think we intended. All right. So my question is, okay, can we just get rid of, as an example, to simplify this, to just get rid of this 90% thing, just get rid of that block and just say, hey, we want maximum lot coverage. Then I think we ought to have the discussion on, do we want pervious surfaces? Okay. All right. And if we do, I think we ought to just describe it in the standard. I don't see, again, I think we ought to ask for what we want as opposed to, quote, incentivizing it. If this is our standard that we want, then I think we ought to write the standard and make it very simple. Otherwise, I think we get all sorts of unintended consequences. And this one here, I think, has a glaring example that could be easily manipulated. So my proposal would be just to remove that wording, 90% if minimum 15% paved surfaces incorporate pervious pavement. That would be the first thing I would just knock off. It's just cross that off. Then I think we ought to have the discussion, okay, of essentially paved surfaces. Do we want to make them a requirement that they have pervious surfaces? And if we do, we ought to just write it in there and get it done.
And I think I'm pretty sympathetic to what Mr. Shada said. It just looks like that 90% allowance if a minimum 15% of paid services incorporate pervious pavement. It just seems to me like we're allowing bigger structures and for a trivial amount of pervious pavement. It looks good. You do the math, and it's not. I don't think it's a good deal for us, and I think it'll be an area where the developers can game with us. And again, I think think the Holiday Inn occupies about a 75% of the building footprint on relative to the lot. So that's pretty dense. When I drive by there or walk by there, it seemed to be built out about as much as I don't think I'd want to see it built out any more than it is. That's my thoughts. Other counselors?
Is the proposal to then just remove the 90% of a minimum 15% paved surfaces, incorporate pervious payment, just remove that?
I'd be okay with that. Okay, I see heads nodding here, over here. Nancy, do you care?
Process, are we gonna vote on these individually or just as a large packet at the end? I just, I'm a little confused by what the process is for coming to a conclusion on this.
Okay.
Ordinance.
Well, we guess we didn't actually vote on the other thing. We're just, I think, trying to get the next draft of the document together. I mean, it seems to me like council is by and large pretty happy with what we've got here. There's a few things that we're sort of nitnoid on. Nonetheless, they're important. We could always kick the can down the road and join and do this January the 3rd, but I think we've got a little time to make some progress on this. So does council want a formal vote on each of these? Julie, your
I
comment?
just wanted to see if I could ask a question about page 23. The whole column on the right of this chart that says Development Standards Incentive Award. Maybe it's on another page, but it looks like 5 feet for decks and patios only, since that's under the incentive column. I assume they did something. The idea is that you could go 5 feet instead of 10 feet if you do something. Is that like a point system, or what gets you from 10 to 5? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Maybe what Julie's saying is what triggers this development standard incentive award is
Thank you,
because
John.
you're doing a deck and a patio. Is that what it is?
In that particular case, yes. So it would be 10 feet for the actual structure, but then a deck or patio, as long as it was continued to use as such, could exceed or could go into that setback up to 5 feet.
So it's not actually an incentive.
C-
Or if it is an incentive, what do I have to do in order to qualify for this incentive? Do I have to, put a solar panel or two on my roof, or what? I don't get what
Right.
allows you to. Maybe you didn't mean that to be an incentive and you're just saying, by the way, you can always just go 5 feet as long as it's a deck or a patio.
That's correct. That term is carried forward from the existing code. So the existing code does have a development standard incentive award. But it is worded similar to how these are also used, just with different topics. So we could rename the column to be I don't know, a flexibility in certain standards. Like, I guess it's meant to communicate if this, then we give flexibility here.
Yeah, but what's the if this? Yeah, that's the part I'm missing. I get the second half of the then. If blank, then you can have a 5-foot deck. What is the if? Do I have to put up a solar panel? Or do I have to, send money to have, what do you? If that's an incentive, I want to know what I have to prove in order to qualify for the incentive. What do I prove?
Right. It might just be the titling of the column.
So there's no incentive really.
No, it's not necessarily you put a solar panel on, then we'll let you encroach for this particular set of standards. So it would just be 5 feet if you build the deck or patio.
I see.
Right. So we
And-
can make that column title more clear.
Yeah, I don't think that's the appropriate title at all. In fact, it's part of the standard requirement. I think you can say minimum front setback, permanent structure, 10 feet. Except 5 feet for decks and patios, if that's what you mean.
So it sounds like to me, a deck or a patio can encroach in that 10 feet, right?
That's correct.
So why don't we just write it out like that?
Yeah.
instead of this incentive award thing, because I'm sort
It's-
of kind of now confused about what's going on with that column. In the same way, can you help describe to me what we meant was going on with minimum side setback permanent principal structure of 5 feet and then 0? How do we get there? Describe that, because I like how you described the deck thing
Mhm.
and how it seemed like you shook your heads where it was like, oh, what we're really saying is that you can encroach with a deck 5 feet, right?
Mhm.
So what happens with this one here? Give me an example.
Right. So if you were, let's say that you have a group of parcels that are all wanting to redevelop at maybe the same time or consequentially in some pattern, as long as if they were developing as part of a planned development of some kind, then they could have a 0-foot setback as long as it was considered as a larger part of a project. Along only the internal lot lines. So the external lot lines, like along the right of way or along parcels of a different ownership, that would remain the same. But if you had a contiguous set of parcels, maybe under the same ownership or part of a development that considered all those parcels, the impact of the internal lot lines would be upon themselves. And so you really could just go right up to 0 feet because it was planned as a single type
So
development.
is this sort of kind of like how you would describe essentially maybe like a townhome or something? Is that an example of something that's got adjacent parcels in which you really end up having essentially a common wall or a 0? Is that sort of kind of like that?
In a way, so you could have, let's say, we'll talk about commercial development. It absolutely would get us there for a townhome type development. But for a commercial development, it might be a commercial condo type project where maybe you have multiple suites occurring on different parcels, but that's all part of a planned development. So that would allow the 0-foot line along a common wall, or if you had we'll just say like an outdoor mall type thing, maybe it makes sense for one building to be right on that property line, and it makes sense for the adjacent parcel to have a structure a little setback further, but it would have to be part of a larger planned development.
So is that the key word that is a part of a PUD?
Since the code doesn't technically have PUDs, it
Mhm.
would be part of a development plan that would
Okay.
be considered at one time.
Okay, so is there a way that on this case here, that we could also clarify that language to say what you said, as opposed to this thing here is kind of giving us an indication of something that we want to have, as opposed to a standard that we're allowing you to have?
Right. And what I'm hearing is that there's confusion on how the column is titled. And so
Mhm.
we can definitely adjust that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So continuing on here, I'm just going to
Well,
continue. Oh, wait a
John,
minute. I'm
here,
sorry.
Julie has a
Yeah.
comment or a
Sorry.
question.
No.
Go ahead,
Before
Julie.
we Continue on. I'm confused. So I just wanted to say, I totally didn't understand your explanation. I'm impressed that Shada did. I didn't understand that at all. So when you write this up the next time to make it clearer, make it even more simple than what you just told us.
Mhm.
So that maybe I'll understand it, because internal lot line, I guess I don't really get what that is.
Right.
But anyway, thank you.
Well, I was just wondering whether the mayor wanted me to just bulldog this on and move on to then the next thing, which is on page 24, which is in yellow, which is maximum building
Okay.
height. Is
Yeah.
that the next bone to pick?
Yeah, if you'd hang on just a second, John. So the business before us tonight is, we're hoping to get this passed on first reading. So as we're going along here, we're making these suggestions, and maybe I've been a little too informal. And I don't mean to cut short on the process, but we are trying to hammer out a lot of little details here. So if council's willing to go on along like this, and if we have consensus, we can go ahead and ask Hannah to go ahead and conform the ordinance for our suggestions and recommendations tonight. We'll still have an opportunity to come back and revisit this in a couple of weeks. Is council okay with that? I mean, see making progress. Okay. So, okay, with that in mind, the end product tonight is we want to get to a first reading. Okay, John, bulldog it.
So, okay, moving on to then page 24 at the top, which is, I believe, some yellow area, which is possibly another bone for clarification, right? Okay, so in that particular case there, okay. It sounds like to me what the intent here is, and just tell me if I'm wrong, is any building that is on the south side of Manitou Avenue, right? Okay. A minimum of 50 feet from Manitou Avenue. So is that the front setback?
Right.
Or does that mean the lot is 50 feet from Manitou Avenue?
As long as the structure existed 50 feet from Manitou Avenue, maybe that's a property that exists that far back, or if there's a property that is so long that has a really linear building, it would be the portion of the structure that's at least that distance.
So I guess what I'm just trying to imagine is, can you give me a more concrete example of what this 39 feet would be and why that would be something that would be allowed, as opposed to, I think we've dealt with the word incentive, that maybe that's not what we want in terms of the title, right?
Exactly.
So in the
Yes.
case of why would 39 feet be allowed in that case, can you paint a picture for me in terms of why that's desirable?
Right. So it's desirable in that the type of development that I understand we want to see on that side of Manitou Avenue is a true mixed use type product where we do have commercial on the ground floor that creates more walkable environment with residential above. The reason for the 39 feet is to help allow for 1 floor of commercial plus 2 floors of residential. And that just includes modern floor to floor heights based on what an architect recommends. We are recommending, based on the code committee discussion, that additional 4 feet is pushed further back to avoid the further feeling of a large structure imposing down on the pedestrian. So that was the idea behind the 39 feet and the reason for the pushback of 50, so that we're giving some allowance for allowing that ground floor commercial, but at the same time requiring it be pushed back so that you don't have an imposing feel on the ground.
So I guess my suggestion would be is that if that's the intent of the suggestion, that we end up with maybe a illustration that demonstrates that, okay, and uses kind of that wording for our next meeting, so that could, because to me, I'm having a hard time. I am convinced of your description. I'm not certain that if I was tested on this in 10 minutes, that I would pass your test. So I'm just asking for maybe some clarification, because I'm just wondering that if this is clear to you, that a future planning commission a year and a half from now, if they run across this language, I'm wondering what they're going to do with it and how they would apply it. And I'm wondering about also how a developer who would look at this would go, what does this mean to me? Okay, if we need this much explanation, it seems like to me we need some clarification. And then that way, maybe that might help guide me to determine whether I want this or not. Okay, it's just not very clear to me. Thank you.
Okay, and John, I don't think you expressed an opinion on the density units for that. It's at 25 density or dwelling units per acre now.
Okay, so the next one is the maximum residential density. Okay, so maybe somebody else ought to take this ball and give me a chance for my brain to rest from the previous yellow. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I guess, and it's a little hard for me to envision what a 25 density unit, dwelling unit per acre density is versus 20. It's not something we deal with intuitively. Yeah, again, I'm inclined to go with lesser densities because I think that's more in keeping with the spirit of Manitou. We can see what it's like in 6 months or a year. No, does someone else have a better feel for that, Judith?
Well, I'll address that in a second. The other question I had was, and I'm gonna pick on the Holiday Inn as a example. In this zone, we're looking at a minimum front setback of 10 feet. Is that correct?
Mhm.
So pretty much on the street. As someone who lives on Becker's Lane and lives across the street from the Becker's Lane condominiums that are just like, they look like at any second they'll fall into the street. I'm trying to really avoid the URA looking like just a wall-to-wall series of Holiday Inns that are 10-foot, that have 10-foot setbacks. We've lost our view shed. I'm sorry, if you're talking 39 feet, you're not going to see the foothills from driving into Manitou. So I'm worried about that 10-foot minimum. My other question to you before I answer the mayor's question is, you mentioned that then above that 39 feet, there's also extra room if you have a belfry or a, right? So there's an additional like 4 feet above that. So how high is the Holiday Inn? What being, if that's our benchmark? 40. So if we had went with 39 and then we have extraneous stuff, HVAC and stuff, then that's over 40 feet. So to me, that if we want to look like downtown Colorado Springs, this is the way to do it. I'm concerned about the 10-foot setbacks. I'm concerned. I think they should be 15. And I would rather see 30 here with a 20 for the density dwelling units per acre. That's me. Max 35. Because now we're going to have structures that are taller than the Holiday Inn in that area. So just food for thought, that are 10-foot. The 10-foot setbacks to me is just, it's going to create in my mind a concrete canyon of development in there. And if that's what the residents and citizens and council wants, that's what we're gonna have. But I think that would be a really big mistake, because I don't think that is keeping with the core values and the character of Manitou. I think we can do better.
Yeah, and I just wanted to explain a little bit about where that came from. And maybe 10 isn't the right number, maybe 15 would still achieve the goal. When we took a tour of the URA area with the working group, and consensus was that we didn't want parking. There's a lot of in that area where the sidewalk just rolls right into pavement, and then you're parking. Actually, we saw some cars parked right on the sidewalk. So we were trying to create that a little separation and not allow for parking in front of the buildings. And so that's why we came up with kind of that variability between 10 and 20 feet to eliminate the option of people parking right in front and create more of a pedestrian oriented environment.
Okay.
But hearing your perspective on the 10 feet and the canyon feel is interesting as well. But that's where that came from, why we pushed it forward a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to add, so the 10 feet also, it helps support that pedestrian environment, but also by pushing structures closer to the road, we're slowing traffic speeds. So the further you push a building back, the further a driver's line of sight is, and they feel more comfortable driving quicker. So if we want to support a pedestrian oriented area, pushing the structure closer, putting parking behind, helps accommodate that, where people driving feel like they are unable to drive fast because they may not be aware of everything. And so that's why a lot of the newer downtowns do push those structures closer. They don't want cars barreling through. And you're always going to have like one or two, but
Is that based on a study we should know about? And if
Yes.
so, how much does that decrease speed? I mean, 1 mile an hour to,
right.
And also we certainly don't want parking in the back on the creek side. So are we talking about different standards for whichever side of the street we're talking about? Maybe we need to go there. So.
Right. So it's I can't name like a specific study by a specific author. However, it's a commonly acknowledged practice within the the fields that the more that you're able to interrupt a driver's line of sight, the slower they tend to go. And we could provide studies that back that up. The other thing is we definitely wanted to make sure that we avoided that concrete canyon feel. And so that's where we chose to require a third story be stepped back further, which would be different than the Holiday Inn. So a new development were to come in, it would be the first 2 stories within 10 feet, which is a lot, it's further back than some of our historic structures, but that third story would be stepped back further, so it would not be looming over you. Plus that you would have to step back a good portion of the facade further. So it's really only 60 or 30% of the facade that would be within 10 feet, and the rest of it would be stepped back. So the Holiday Inn right now, the whole structure is right up at that setback line versus with this new code, you would only have a portion and the rest would be stepped back. I think at 20 is the commercial standard.
So you have a footnote number 2 that sends you to 18.324, which is on page 30. Is that correct? See that tiny little footnote number 2 up there? So that sends you to that sends us to page 267 in the packet, or page 30 of the red line code, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so using that example of 39 feet, can you help me understand with what's happening with that figure? 18.03.241 with regard to this 39 feet. What does that look like there?
It would be the buildings behind the buildings you see here. So these buildings would be kind of your street frontage buildings.
Okay.
And then if you had a building, say that top figure 18.03.24-1,
Yes,
say that was 50 feet deep. So at the back end of that building, now you could pop up an additional 4 feet.
okay, so, but the key component is you have to be 50 feet back?
Correct.
Okay. So roughly speaking, from the standpoint of that figure there, because you're a professional, you can eyeball those buildings. What's the depth of those buildings there approximately?
Probably are about 50 feet.
Okay,
Yep.
okay, thank you. I just wanted to, so what you're saying is that looking at that figure 18.03.241, that a building that is immediately behind this building, okay, the proposed standard of that yellow thing could be 39 feet, correct? Okay. All right, that helps me a lot to understand that. Thank you.
Great.
I just wanted to,
Natalie.
yeah. So I think it's really important to distinguish between the north side of the street and the south side of the street, because I think that when we talk about the Holiday Inn Express, there's a certain visual, and then we talk about El Colorado Lodge, it's a very different visual, and those heights are there. That El Colorado Lodge building is very high, but again, based on its location, and I would say maybe the correct use of the code at that time, it works. And I think the other piece is that that we discussed was the idea of that 39 feet helping to block some of the noise from Highway 24. So it's not really a view that we're blocking. It might actually just be Highway 24 and some of that vehicular noise. So I do feel like the next time you drive through the town to look at that south side, I think it was shocking to all of us when we did that walkthrough to realize how high some of those structures are, particularly from the road, but it doesn't feel that way because it's a different type of property. And so just distinguishing between that so that we can support maybe some interesting things on those properties, I think is worth investigating.
Okay, Julie?
Thanks. On page 30, the first figure -1, did you say that 39 feet is that yellow, or John asked you if it's the yellow part and you said yes? I thought 39 feet was the height of the third floor that's, set, whatever it is, 50 feet back from something, from I don't know, from what? So where's the 39 feet? Is it is it at the top of the third floor there or?
So this graphic does not include that 39 feet. What John was asking is where the 39 feet would start. And if you look at that building, if you look at the depth of the building from the front to the back, it's roughly 50 feet.
Oh, I see. You're
Yeah,
talking from
so
the front
then
to-
that 39 feet would be behind this building.
And then you had mentioned earlier, I want to know what ceiling heights you're using here when you tell us that if there's commercial plus 2 floors above, we need X. So, and you explained that the commercial property needs a
Yeah,
higher ceiling? Is that
So-
just tradition or is there like a true need?
a true, well, I guess probably both. We talked to a lot of architects or a few architects. And most architects say they need minimum of 12 feet for a commercial floor, but they're typically going 14 feet for that bottom floor for commercial uses.
So when you calculated this 39 as the max, you were assuming that up to 14 feet of that would be on the first floor?
Correct. Yep.
And then what are you doing for the ceiling heights for the residential above?
So after we came up with the 39, we had done some research to come up with 39 and we continued to get some information flowing in afterwards. And an architect who does mixed use development came back to us and said that the rule of thumb in the architectural world is 14 feet for that initial floor for commercial and then 11 feet for each floor of
I
residential.
see. Well,
as a
that's really
minimum.
helpful to me because I feel very inexperienced with respect to observations of ceiling heights in commercial buildings. I'm just not that observant. But I do believe that we can live without 11-foot ceilings in our new residential.
Yeah, I think the 11 feet includes about a foot. There's a foot in each floor for your equipment. So you end up with a 10-foot ceiling height.
So they're really 10-foot ceiling heights.
Mhm. We use the 11-foot dimension to get that floor to floor dimension, which adds up to 36 feet for a 3-story building.
And then the HVAC allowance on top, is that an additional 4 feet or more?
5, it could be an additional 5 feet.
Oh, my God.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's go back to, if we could recap, Judith, you were the first, I think, to address the dimensions for the at hand there. So could you refresh our
Well,
memory here?
So that's what I added up, 14 for the first floor and 2 11-foot floors, that's 36. So I wasn't sure where that 39 feet came from, plus an additional potential 5 for things on top. So I'm going to be a fan of 30 feet plus 5 for everything, but I understand that what we're trying to achieve here. So the old code was 35. If the professionals are saying we need 35 to 36, that would be the maximum I'd want to go. With a 20 dwelling units per acre. And I do understand now the thinking behind the 10-foot setbacks. I get that now. So I'm flexible on that. So that's where I'm standing. If that was your question.
Yeah, I want to see kind of what you were proposing there. So, okay, so Counselor Chandler had suggested 36 feet maximum height. This is for the MUC, the mixed use commercial zone, the URA basically. So 36 feet max height with a 20 dwelling unit per acre density and 10-foot setbacks. So how's that suit you, council? Is that something you all want to support and ask them to?
And just for
Thank you.
clarification, and that includes the business about setting back the higher part of the building 50 feet from the whatever, what is it from? Is it from the street? Where do we?
It's from the right of way, from the
From the right of
Manitou
way.
Avenue right of
Okay.
way.
So John, are you including that?
Yes, that would.
That
that-
provision that the higher part be set back further from the
Yes, that,
sidewalk.
I'd be okay with that. Is that what you were thinking of, Judith?
So for clarification purposes, on this line here on page 24 at the top, can you guys help me with the numbers that you're proposing here? Where it says maximum building height standard requirements, does that stay 35?
Maximum building height. Yeah, it says 35 under standard.
Is that what you guys are proposing?
Well, she said 36.
36.
Okay,
And then,
and then the retitled column, okay, that will end up with some kind of a new title. Does that remain 39?
No, it goes away.
I think,
That gets
yeah,
eliminated?
it's highlighted in yellow currently. It would just go away.
Okay, and then just for clarification purposes, you're also proposing that the maximum residential density go from 25 to 20?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to clarify what.
No,
you're
no, I
proposing.
think it's good. I mean,
Thank you.
it's good that we clarify it.
But what we didn't address was the bonus. Because there is in those notes, excuse me for jumping in, Mayor, I apologize. I didn't ask to be called on, but I would vote for having a separate discussion about that with regards to affordable housing.
Okay, and maybe that's a discussion for another night. If I think, if we can get setbacks and heights tonight, we'll be doing pretty well, I think. Okay. Does that seem to be pretty simple, that what council's supportive of? Okay. Okay, so we did high density residential and mixed use. Okay. I think that those were the areas I had the biggest concern with. We can go through the other zones if council desires. Judith?
Mayor, I just wanted to also, if we could get this clarified tonight, because it affects all of them, is the, I believe this is page 10, slide, how we measure. To confirm, are we all on the same page of how we actually are measuring? And I believe that the planning commission recommended, where are we? I said page 10, did I need that? Yes. The image of the alternative approach measuring building height in the envelope.
Judith, page number, please.
10,
Page 10 of 233. Okay, yeah, there's that little graphic at the bottom of the page and talking about the envelope. Yeah, I was curious about that too. How does that get calculated?
I have a quick question too. How does that work when it slopes downward? Like, does the building shrink as it goes downward behind? I mean, I can understand the visual, but the reverse seems weird to me. I just want to throw that out there.
So it would work the same going downhill as uphill. It's basically taking, if you take a plane, so you take that sloped plane and you create kind of a volume. So you go up from that existing slope in a volume and you get that same kind of, that line that the slope creates, you would have that same line up in the air, so to speak. That's where your building height would be measured. What's kind of nice about this, what I liked about it in conjunction with all the conversations we've been having, is it innately allows for a stepped building. So some of our longer buildings in the mixed use commercial district specifically, as you're going up the hill, you know, you're still kind of maintaining that 36-foot building height relative to the existing grade. So you're kind of stepping your building as you go. If you have a long, say you have like a 200-foot long building, which you do have several of those properties in the mixed use commercial area. Same thing if you're going downhill. So one thing, you know, we've talked a lot about the south side of Manitou Avenue and the impacts with Highway 24, but on the reverse, on the north side, you end up with, from the street perspective, you know, maybe a 35 foot building, but on the backside with that drop, it can look enormous. So it goes the same way. So on the backside of, you know, Long Fountain Creek, you would actually be stepping the building down, which I think would be a much more attractive feeling to what we've all been talking about all along. So that's why when this came to my attention as an option, I went, aha, yes, I think this solves a lot of our issues. So. I hope that explained it. So it's kind of like a volume. Then if you're cutting into the slope in any fashion, it's still measured based on that existing grade and that volume going up. And if you guys like this, we'll create some more graphics that really make it clear in the document.
And that would make it clear. You started out this presentation by saying that one of the goals is supposedly to make this more understandable for the average Joe.
Right.
So if here we are struggling, we know that there's a problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Council, do we want to look at the other zones, or? I think the sentiments that were expressed to me, that were mainly the HDR and the MUC areas. Okay. Council, do you want to, if we had enough, originally I had planned to go to about 8:45. We've gone over that. I think we've done pretty good work tonight.
There were additional outstanding questions from staff, were there not?
Yes, we are very, very close to being done. So I know that it's a long push tonight. But of course, I'm happy to do with whatever the will of the council, but there are only a few leftover things and then we're on to second reading. If we could plow through just the last couple topics that I've noted as concerns that I've heard from council and get clarification. And then I think we're ready to help state what we've heard from council and even move forward with a motion.
Okay, we're listening. Go ahead.
Great. So we've talked about the two primary things being building height and density and HDR and mixed use commercial, and those are the two big ones. Another big one is the definition of household. And so the existing proposed draft has a limitation of unrelated individuals. There are options to increase that. There are options to completely eliminate regulating unrelated individuals or to follow the housing code. I'm not sure if council feels particularly strongly one way or the other on that topic.
I guess my thought is that this is something that's very hard to legislate, and in Manitou, with kind of our diverse population, I think any rule we came up with, we'd find some group that's a little bit outside the bounds. I personally don't know that I don't feel like we're going to come up with a perfect answer, so I wouldn't push too hard. I did like the definition I think was Denver had, which was pretty expansive. It maybe you could pull that up. And on council, did anybody have anything that struck a chord in your heart? Julie and then Nancy and
Well, in
Natalie.
thinking about it more, and then I had a chance to talk to Darlene a little bit during the break, and I don't know, she's left already, unfortunately. But I've heard now about two examples where failure to have a specific number of unrelated people in our ordinance has caused some serious problems. And so I am support. Oh, and she also explained to me why 2 people per bedroom could be a nightmare, because she had where she lives in this tiny little cul-de-sac, 6-bedroom home that was rented to 12 people, 2 per bedroom, 12 cars. It was a nightmare. And finally, the owner sold it. Now it's owner occupied. But I thought, so it's not just, downtown with some of these other places that we're familiar with that cram too many people into a household, but it can be a problem elsewhere. So I'm supportive of the idea of having a limit to the number of unrelated people, even if, enforcement is difficult and it won't be a problem regularly. And I'm supportive of there being 4 or 5 people. I mean, you can still have 12 kids and 10 dogs and everything else, but 5 unrelated people as the max. 4 to 5.
Okay. Natalie, what's your thought?
I'm comfortable with the recommendation, but when we were reviewing the different options I liked the 2 adults per bedroom up to 8 adults.
Okay. Anybody else? Judith?
I concur with the mayor. I really like the Denver definition. Because it includes, a functional equivalent of a family, but it also limits it to 5 adults. So it reads a household as people who live together as a family or as a functional equivalent of a family, up to 5 adults of any relationship plus minors. There's more in there, but that's the gist of it. I support that.
Nancy,
Excuse me. I am also support two people per, two unrelated people, well, two people per bedroom. And living as a household entity for a maximum of 8. I think it's, I'm hesitant to get unnecessarily restrictive on this.
no, we don't. At the risk of kicking the can down the road, would it be possible, we've given you 2 or 3 options. If you could put just a brief paragraph for each description in there and we'll pick, next time we meet and discuss this, it'll be either vanilla, chocolate or strawberry. We'll have to pick one of the, say, if you give us 3 options, we'll think about it and we'll try to make our best guess. Unless council, if somebody's got a miracle and you know how to solve this, I'd be happy to hear it, but
Well, I'm comfortable compromising. I'm okay with the Denver version.
okay.
You just asked which one I liked. You
Okay.
didn't ask
Yeah,
me which
no,
one I'd be
that's
willing
fine.
to-
No, and really, the other ones that were suggested here, there's nothing is perfect. Those are probably as workable as anything else. It's defining what constitutes a household is a pretty tricky thing. And it seems to be sort of tangential to the real thrust of what we want to do. If there's no opposition right now, I would ask that we'd have several options. We can think it over and come back to it. Is that okay? I don't think we're kicking the can down the road too far on that. Okay. What else you got?
So the other one is regarding, so we talked about that, regarding the potential for inclusionary zoning. And that's the heart of the comment that Councilor Shada is mentioning about the low income housing. So the term inclusionary housing essentially means that you are required to provide a certain number of units within a particular development that meet a certain area median income. And usually that's percentage based. So what we could bring forward again is options for inclusionary zoning versus incentive based housing. Thank you. Yes, thank you. So what we could do is in the red line, I'm hearing that there's some opposition to incentive-based housing affordability, but there is support for inclusionary zoning. So we'll take a look at what maybe is feasible for this code, maybe for larger developments of 8 units or more. Maybe it's 10% have to meet 100% area median income, but we can provide some comparisons in generally what that means and where that would fall into the code and how it would change it.
That seems like a decent proposal to me.
Great.
Council, we're okay. We're good with that. Okay, do it.
Okay, and the last couple of things is variances. I just want to make sure that everybody's all right with the variance criteria, the idea of having those base 2 required criteria and the 4 out of 6 being required also. Oh, sorry, it's getting late. I'm tired also.
We weren't given any examples of that, though. We'd have to go find it among these 233 pages, or do you want to direct us?
Sure. So the criteria is on page. All right, I'm getting there, almost there. Variance criteria are on page 176.
Thank you.
Or starting on 175 at the bottom of the page. And essentially what's being proposed is a removal of the 5th criteria. It's pretty straightforward. It's not really criteria language. It's more of a statement that was moved to another section. And so an adjustment was made instead of requiring 5, but requiring 4 in addition to 2 mandatory criteria.
One seven.
May I ask a question? Hannah?
Please, Judith.
I was the one that brought up the issue of, a lot of times developers come and they go, oh, there's just no design alternative. It's, and this would be number two. And I'm actually okay with, I'm really flexible with this is the way council goes, but with number two, is it possible to word it such that, both the developer and the planning department concur that there are no design alternatives or alternative locations? Because I would be really comfortable with that language that you both, that both entities agree. And then I would be okay with eliminating number 5 and going with the variance number of requirements that you propose. Is
I
that?
think that could be problematic legally.
Yeah, you're the legal brain.
Well,
Talk to me.
I mean, these are, what we're doing is we're creating rules, right? So you have to do this, you have to do this. Otherwise, if you want a variance, you have to do this. But if we say in the code that we want planning and the developer to agree on something, the developer can say, I want to build a 100, I want to build a 10-story building and I want to do blah, blah, blah. And I don't agree, but I don't think it should have anything to do with who agrees. I mean, ultimately, it'll be up to council, I would imagine, if anyone appealed it. And in that case, it would be really goofy to have it say in here that we want planning to agree with the developer or the developer to agree with the planning.
I
I
hear
don't
what
know.
you're
That's-
saying.
I just thought that part of it should come.
Where I was coming from was, and there are many examples in this town of a developer that comes in and says, I absolutely cannot change it. And then planning department's like, that's a pretty easy fix. Here's some recommendations. So there have been situations where that's occurred. Sometimes variances are required, but so I'm just, and I see Jeff Parker in the background. So having him weigh in would be.
Well, you're all doing so great without my input. I just, I
Yeah.
did hear the word legal, and I think that, planning certainly can provide input regarding whether or not, the variance criteria are met, and they'll do that as part of their staff report and their analysis. And so, I don't think you need to particularly put anything about them agreeing or not agreeing. They'll be able to address the criteria, and then you'll know whether they think that it meets the criteria or not. And then the reviewing body will make the decision based on everything they get, all the evidence in front of them, including planning's opinion.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. I had to say something tonight, so I hope you don't mind me cutting in.
No, that's fine.
And I have one last topic.
Okay.
And that is if the council is in agreement with the red lines proposed by the planning commission, other than what we've discussed tonight. And then we can go ahead and make those changes official.
All of them?
Right, so the red lines that are in the red line document were proposed, or technical modifications were proposed by the planning commission, other than the topics that we've received direction from the council on tonight. If the council's in agreement with making those red lines or changes, if there was another topic that the council disagreed with the planning commission on.
Hannah, those are primarily here.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
More administrative. I mean, it was like some definitions that were included, and the others are more technical and not substantive. The red lines that you put in there, anything that was more substantive, you put in a yellow box for us, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
I think I'd be comfortable with the red lines there. I mean, I gave this a pretty thorough read, and it's not an area that I have a whole lot of expertise in, but it seemed to make a lot of sense. So I didn't have too many complications. Other members of council, what are your thoughts?
I'm okay with the red line versions. And I just want to have a dark sky question. Don't forget that. Okay.
Okay, so I guess relative to the red lines, and council's comfortable with that, so go ahead and make it so. And then Judith, you have a dark skies.
I do. So the last time we met together, we were talking about dark sky compliance, and now that has changed. And I do believe is that page 16, if we want to go back, I want to say it was 16. I could be way off, but what was the intent to not include that because there will be an ordinance coming forward, or because you felt, walk me and talk me through the thinking about changing that? I believe I'm sorry, it was on your slide presentation, number 16 of your slides is where I think I saw that. If you have
Yeah,
that
I
to
need
pull
help
up.
remembering. I'm gonna take this one. So I will tell you that the standards we've put in here are basically dark sky compliance. So the three main components that you look at with dark sky compliance, there's more complexity to it, but if you at least have downward directed lights that are shielded, so they're not going up into the night sky. If you manage the color and temperature and light output, those are the three biggest factors for dark sky compliance. The only reason we're not truly calling it dark sky at the moment is because the city's lights that are maintained by Colorado Springs Utilities are not dark sky compliant because they're the globes. So they don't have that full cutoff downward directed. They are fairly, I think they're in the right color range and they don't put out a lot of illuminance. So I think they're partially compliant. They're just not downward directed. So what we came to the conclusion of when we started looking at this is we really are going towards dark sky compliance, but by actually stating that we're dark sky, I don't think we can quite go there yet until CSU and the city can come to terms on replacement of the street lights.
Thank you. That satisfies my question.
So can we make our development standards dark sky compliance, and we can deal with that in our franchise agreement with CSU?
That's your homework, John.
I know, that's why I'm trying to say whether can we make the code dark sky compliant? Okay, and then we'll deal with like your observation that we have a problem with CSU as to whether it is 90% there or whatever it is, right? That we can probably deal with that because we have an upcoming franchise agreement negotiation with them. That's my comment. So where are we from the standpoint of dark sky compliance in the actual rewrite of the code?
I think you're most of the way there. I could take one more look at it and give you a solid answer on comparison.
Okay.
But those are the three components and we've met those three
Okay.
with the regulations here.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Thank you.
yep.
Great. Council, any further discussion on the OUDC tonight?
I just have a quickie.
Okay.
So I understand then that because to me, those lights are way too bright. I feel like when I'm coming into town from Colorado Springs, I feel like I'm in some runway or pulling into Las Vegas on the strip or some crazy thing. So I can't stand it. But if we were to at least change the intensity of the light so it wasn't as bright, it seems to me that would probably be less expensive than forcing Colorado Springs to like give us a different kind of downward globe or cover, whatever the word is. Do you know what is the brightness in those bulbs? And is there a requirement that in the code rewrite that future lights be less bright than that? I didn't look to see if there was any kind of brightness limitation other than seeing things about the downward draft of the light.
I'm giving myself a refresher on what we did here. So one of the pieces is on page 33 of the document in section 18.03.4.4. At the very bottom, item E, we talk about the color temperature being not exceeding 3000 Kelvin. So that's gives you more of the amber lights rather than the bright blue and white lights. So that helps a little bit. And then the light levels not exceeding 0.1 foot candle. That's another kind of technical term for lighting levels. But that will get you more the lighting level as it radiates out from the light. I think those are the two main pieces at the moment, but.
So I don't know if the word wattage is appropriate, but what's the wattage or the brightness of the lights that are on the street now? The URA lights.
Yeah, I have no idea, but we can maybe see if we can
Because I
find out
would
what
just,
those are.
because at least it would give me a frame of
Yeah.
reference.
Yeah,
I just know personally, I'd like something less bright than that. But we can come back to that. Thank you.
yeah. Well, and I'll give you an example. Sedona, Arizona is one of the dark sky compliant, one of the first dark sky compliant communities. And when you see pictures of Sedona at night, it looks really yellow. And I know so just a little history, we used to have yellow, I can't remember, sodium lights or something. And then we've shifted to different types of lighting and it's gotten whiter and brighter, especially LEDs are very tricky because they put out so much light. And the LED community is starting to try to get that light level to be compliant with dark sky. But a lot of communities that have gone dark sky, it's actually the city on the street lights that have kind of staked the claim and said, we're going to go with the more amber lights, the more yellow lights, downward directed, and try to bring those light levels down to the lowest that they can be, but still provide safety. So
Does Colorado Springs own those light posts? So we can like ask them to please take them away if we decided we didn't like them anymore? I mean, I would assume, right? We own them. Oh, you're wrong.
we own
We
them,
own
they
them.
maintain them.
I think Colorado Springs Utilities owns the poles.
Oh, they own the
believe so.
poles. So if we wanted like every other
Look
pole to
what's-
be removed because they're too close together and, they could just take half of them away, or we could just tell them you need to change the light bulbs. I mean, I understand that they may own them, but it's our land. Don't we have any say in this? How does that work?
I believe that it's covered by your franchise
Yes,
agreement.
I think we can get off, we're getting off topic there, so.
I'm surprised
let's-
Judy didn't
let's
yell
go
at
back.
me.
Well,
That's your job.
okay, I think it's getting late. We're all a little bit fuzzy, so. Okay, it seems to me like we're pretty well, we're at a point here where we can wrap this up. I'm going to ask for a motion. Are we close? Is there anything else that's really germane to the topic here?
So from my perspective, we've talked about all the topics that had question marks on them, and we have very clear direction on what you would want to see for second reading. So with some additional information coming forward about the households and about inclusionary zoning. And Jeff might need to help me if we technically need a motion for this to be considered first reading, understanding that we'll be bringing a couple topics back.
Yeah, I think it's good to have the city council approve it via motion, first reading, and then it proceeds to second reading. So.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
So I move approval of this on first reading with essentially all our discussion as caveats of changes that will be coming to us in second reading.
Second.
Motion is second. Do we have any discussion? If not, let's go ahead and vote.
hang on here, it just kicked my vote out. Give me just a second. Okay, we're gonna do that again. Okay, worked that time. 7-0 in favor. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. It's been 20 years. Roughly 20 years. Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor, that's the only thing we'll put on the agenda for the next meeting. No, I'm teasing.
Then we may want to think about that way. That may be what we want. Okay, great. Well, good work. Okay. All right. So the next item of business, it's review and adoption of the City of Manitou Springs Employee Handbook, Organizational Policies and Procedures. We have Kelly Padilla here, our HR specialist. She'll walk us through that. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Good evening, everyone.
Do you need Kelly?
So I am here. I know that everyone did everyone have a chance to go over the employee handbook with all the red lines? So I just want to run through it real quick. Is there anything that anyone would like to point out? Rather than read through each one individually?
Yeah, I guess, my sense of this is it's largely in response to changes in the law and whatnot. So we're doing housekeeping tonight to make sure that we're up to date with regulations that we don't really have any say about.
Well, yeah, correct. It's basically like you said, the legal things that have changed. It's very minimal. Last year, we did a really thorough job of going through everything. So I just wondered if anyone read over this, if there's anything that you'd like to pull out and we could go over, or if you're good, or would you like me to go through each one?
Mayor, may I make?
Denise?
There's one that's not legal, but that we are recommending, and that's the administrative leave. So that is not a legal requirement, but last year we had only certain people that would get administrative leave if they're exempt. I always get exempt and non-exempt mixed up. But what we're recommending is everybody in that category. So for instance, like a planner 2 may not get a week administrative leave, but the city does get a week administrative leave. And we're recommending that everybody in that category gets the week, because most of them do spend nights in council meetings at one point or another, or they're working more than the 40 hours a week. So that is one thing that's not legal, but that we included in this.
Okay. Okay, does anybody, do any council members have other areas they'd particularly like to go into detail on? Judith?
Well, I went through it thoroughly, and since we did such an overhaul last year, I actually read the whole thing, and I didn't find anything after, the city administrator clarified the administrative leave. I'm okay with it as is, and I would certainly be willing to put forward a motion unless someone else has some issues with it.
Anybody else have topics they'd like to go over? Okay, I guess I'd like a little clarification on the administrative leave. Is this time off for?
Yes.
Okay.
So the week of administrative leave in the past was primarily for the directors and people that would need to come to council, go to their boards and commissions and things like that to try to make up, because they are exempt, they don't get overtime, and they're spending a lot of extra hours. So it's a week, it's 40 hours of additional paid time off. So it's basically a 40-hour vacation week provided. What we looked at is there were some positions such as the engineer, because of that ranking, it's exempt. It's not necessarily a director position. It's very equitable to like a senior planner, the police commissioner or the police commander, excuse me. So we're looking across the board, trying to make it fair. At the end of the day, we added about 3 or 4 extra people that weren't on it before, just because they're exempt, but we wanted to make sure it's fair across the board and we're not leaving anyone out and expecting these staff members to work additional hours and not get the benefit that everyone else is getting at that point.
And I think the 3 positions were the commander, the planner 2, and
it was the senior planner, the commissioner, and
the commander, the police commander. And what was the third one?
Engineer.
No, the engineer already had it. But there was one other, it might have been Kevin at parking.
Yes.
Parking. So those 3 did not have it before. And we're just trying to make it equitable, because they all do work hours. They come to council, they do other things. So it's making it equitable across the board.
Yeah.
I guess I have a little bit of heartburn with that. I mean, almost everybody I know who's been salaried has at times worked more than 40 hours, and in some cases, closer to 60 hours a week. So to me, that's part of the job. And we've done, I think, a lot of things. We've increased salaries. We've done compensation studies. We buy people new trucks. Yeah, I think we've tried to be a pretty good employer, and I think we are. So I don't see giving away, more vacation, basically vacation time. So I would not support that part. I could support the rest of the handbook being updated. It's my 2 cents. Other council comments? Natalie?
And I just know that I'm, with Kevin, the MAP meetings, our MAP meetings go forever. So I just know that I spend hours with Kevin every week after hours, but I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to go with the recommendations of staff on this one, but
Okay. We have a motion?
Yes, we're going to. I move that we approve on first. I'm sorry. Where are we? I move that we adopt the City of Manitou Springs Employee Handbook as presented for 2023.
Do we have a second?
second.
Seconded by Nancy. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote.
Six to one in favor. Mayor Graham voting no.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that brings us to council correspondence. Does anybody have anything? Michelle?
I'm hoping at the next work session, if we can discuss the Plastic Bag Reduction Act.
Okay, I see Denise making a note of that.
Because I think the chamber's been working on that actively, so they would probably need to be involved in the conversation.
Julie?
I got approached by someone who had issues with the signs in Manitou. She said that the yellow numbers on the parking spot signs of how many parking spots there are in each lot are really obnoxious, especially at night. She wanted to know if it's at all possible to turn them off at night, because she doesn't want to see all these zeros everywhere. And then she kind of went off on the tangent about the signs, and then said that there are 2 signs at the Savelli's intersection with Crystal Hills Boulevard. Let's say there's Crystal Hills Boulevard sign is on the right on the sidewalk there on the south side of the street, but then there's also another sign for the same street overhead up high by the traffic lights. And she thought that was, like, why do we need 2 signs for the same street? And then there's a new sign. She said that it says fire department, and it's underneath the sign by the pool on Manitou Ave, under the sign that says fire danger, minimal, medium, high. But now there's a new sign under there that says, just in case we wanted to know, brought to you by the fire department. And she's like, forget too many signs. Take down the fire department sign. We only need 1 sign for Crystal Hills on the same intersection. And please turn off the yellow lights at night, which I have no idea if that's feasible, but if not, maybe even just put like a little cover on it, because it is, in my opinion, kind of crass as well. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. So this was a direct observation that I made, and I really thought about how best to present this information. And I think really the best way to do that is in public record. I serve as a volunteer crossing guard once a week at the Manitou Elementary School. And last Wednesday, I was at my station at Pawnee and Manitou Avenue. And the trash service that empties the the bear-proof trash bins on the avenue that came by. And I witnessed, I just watched this happen, at least 4 or 5 containers. I watched this person empty the containers and put the trash and the recycles into the same trash receptacle, leading me to be very concerned about whether we are in fact recycling. Concerned about that. So I just kind of walked around and just observed, and that happened with all of the trash cans that I observed in that general area in the Wichita parking lot and the ones on the avenue close to where I was standing. So I want to bring that up because I'm concerned about that on a number of levels. I want to make sure that if we're not recycling, we know why. And if we are supposed to be recycling, we have a contract for recycling and it's not happening. I think we need to look into that. And so I just wanted to bring that direct observation to Denise's attention and to council's attention. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Well, I've got a couple of things. We had talked a couple of weeks ago about whether we wanted to do a kind of a strategic planning evening on the night of, it'd be the second Tuesday in February. That'd be the 14th, which is Valentine's Day. You probably remember talking about that. I think there's been more sentiment expressed by at least several council people that we'd rather do like a full Saturday retreat. So I guess here's my proposal, and that would be that we take the night of the 14th off. Okay, salute to Valentine's Day. And then we do the Saturday either before or after. So that's the 11th or the 18th. Now the 18th is Carnival. So maybe that's maybe that's a simple answer. I think Carnival, this room may be in use that day. I'm not sure.
It's not reserved at this time, Mayor.
It's not reserved this time. So we could do either the 11th or the 18th. If there's an indication from council what you want to do tonight, we can go ahead and put the date in concrete. I was thinking the 11th. Okay, then. Okay, work the 11th, party the 18th. Does that sound like a council that we all know and love? Okay, so Denise will make the retreat on the 11th. This will be an opportunity. I think you all remember that we talked about, if we end up with more money than we thought we'd have. In other words, if the marijuana thing failed in Colorado Springs, which it did, this is our opportunity to figure out what we're going to do now. So we've got, this should be a happy meeting. Okay, so we will do that. The other thing is, the first meeting of the new year, we typically do our liaison assignments. I've asked, remember last year, Nancy, or actually this year, Nancy had talked about trying to have better relationships with our boards and commissions. So she's going to be bringing that back in about the middle of March. I was wondering if council, if we maybe shouldn't just keep our liaison positions that we have now and wait till we get into that so that we can rethink our relationships with our boards. I think, Michelle, you'd expressed some thoughts about trying to have a better working relationship with Parab. It's a lesson we can have. Natalie, I think maybe you've expressed that sentiment a couple of times. So we can do that. If somebody's really wanting to change liaison assignments, we can entertain that idea before the middle of March. But if it's not a huge thing, I'd ask that we wait and rethink our relationship. Does that seem okay? Okay, it seems to be. Okay, so we'll do that. We'll just leave our liaison assignments as they were. So we'll reappoint them automatically at the next meeting. Okay, that's all I had. City Administrator's report.
Just a couple of things. As you know, we presented to DOLA asking for some money for the water tank. I got an unofficial notice that we have been denied this time because we weren't quite completely ready and we had not completed the loan application. The good news is we'll go in again at the March timeframe and the application will go up to $1 million instead of the 750,000. We scored high on everything except for that loan application. And they were hoping that by then we have some analysis for the rates also as we move forward. So they thought that would be a good place. I said, there are certain things that we need to go ahead and start now. We just need to. They said, that's fine. That can be part of the match as we move forward. So it's a good news, bad news, because they are increasing the amount, which is $1 million. And that would be very beneficial as we move forward. So everything else scored high. So that was really good. Other than that, I don't have anything at this time, except it's been a great 2022 and look forward to exciting 2023. And thank you for your service and for your leadership over the last year.
And thank you for your service. Okay, so tonight we also have 2 executive sessions, pretty typical this time of year. I will go ahead and read the descriptions, and I'll ask for a motion to go into executive session. So the first item in executive session to discuss a personnel matter regarding to an employee pursuant to 5.1A of the Manitou Springs City Charter. The executive session concerns the annual performance review of the city clerk. And then the second item references the same part of the city charter. This executive session concerns the annual performance review of the police chief. And those will be presented by Denise. Dare entertain a motion?
I move that we enter executive session at 9:48.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Okay, all in favor, say aye, or who wants to vote, Judy? Electronically, okay.
7-0 in favor.
Okay, great. Let's take about 5 minutes while we make the transition into executive session.
And Mayor, I assume that we do not need Jeff Parker to stay for the executive session since it's about reviews. Is that correct?
I think we're okay. Yeah. Merry Christmas, Jeff.
You too. Have a great holiday, everybody.